If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 121. This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 121. Meanwhile, after leaving Tenshikaku, Luo Qing made his way back to his safe house. Even though it was late at night, the Hanamizaka night market was still bustling. The streets were crowded with people, the shops on both sides brightly lit, adding to the lively atmosphere. As Luo Qing strolled down the street, he drew a lot of attention. After the commotion at the Vision Hunt ceremony, word of Luo Qing and Lumen's exploits had spread throughout Inajima City. Some even speculated that it wouldn't be long before he was publicly executed. But now, here he was, walking freely through Hanamizaka as if nothing had happened. This surprised the citizens of Inajima, leading them to speculate about his relationship with the Shogun. After all, he had openly defied her will, and yet he remained unscathed. Luo Qing, unfazed by the stares, grabbed some snacks from a food stall and made his way back to his safe house. As he reached his room, he heard faint voices coming from inside. Curious, he paused outside the door to listen in on what his subordinates were saying. Inside, the four who had been sent back by Luo Qing were gathered in his room. They were eating a late-night meal, celebrating their master's survival, and drinking heavily while gossiping about Luo Qing. The four were completely engrossed in their conversation, unaware that their boss was eavesdropping just outside. "Do you think Master Luo Qing really managed to win over the Shogun?" whispered Teresa. "Of course he did. When I was around, the Raiden Shogun even came looking for him in the middle of the night. Who knows what they were up to the whole time?" Natalia chimed in. "But that's the legendary Raiden Shogun we're talking about. She's on the same level as Her Majesty the Tsaritsa. If Master Luo Qing could win her over, then doesn't that mean he could also, with the Tsaritsa too?" Sergei speculated boldly. "Shhh. Sergei. You can't say things like that. Lady Rosalin might be awake next door, reading light novels. If she hears you, we're done for." Igor quickly interrupted. "I'm just saying, who would have thought Master Luo Qing was that fierce? What do you think the Shogun saw in him?" Sergei continued. Maybe he's good in bed? I've heard him mumble about something called the Away 18 moves." Teresa speculated quietly. "Or maybe, he's just, well endowed? I've seen him in the morning sometimes and well, let's just say it's hard to miss." Natalia added with a knowing look. "Yeah, that could be it. Maybe the Shogun likes that kind of thing," Sergei nodded. Could be. Igor agreed. "Judging by how eager Master Luo Qing looked earlier, I'd bet tonight will be another night of passion," Teresa said excitedly. "Do you think gods can get pregnant?" "No idea. Probably, right." Outside the door, Luo Qing was speechless. Frustration value +1 from Luo Qing. "This is how my subordinates talk about me? Have I gone too easy on them lately?" Swinging the door open, Luo Qing found the four of them lounging on his sleeping mat, drinking and cracking sunflower seeds. The four froze, staring at their master in shock. They couldn't believe he was standing there. Shouldn't he be busy, with the Raiden Shogun? "Good evening, Master Luo Qing." After a brief moment of silence, the four of them scrambled to stand up, saluting him with the traditional gesture of the Fatui. "You four." Luo Qing was about to reprimand them when he heard hurried footsteps from down the hallway. Suddenly, Rosalin's head peeked out from behind a door. "What's with all the noise in the middle of the night? Don't you all have work tomorrow?" "Luo Qing. You actually made it back." Seeing Luo Qing at the doorway, Rosalin seemed genuinely surprised. "Yes, is that a problem?" Luo Qing replied with a slight smile. "What's this, Rosalin? Were you worried about me?" "Humph, I was worried you'd embarrass Her Majesty by dying in Inajima." With that, Rosalin gave a disdainful snort and slammed her door shut. A muffled voice came from the other side. "Keep it down, or I'll burn every one of you to a crisp." Luo Qing felt a little awkward. "I mean, my subordinates are watching. She doesn't have to be so blunt. Guess I'll have to train her properly later." "Sit down," he ordered, stepping into the room and shutting the door behind him. Though Luo Qing had told them to sit, none of them dared to move. They continued to stand at attention, waiting for his lecture. "Teresa." Luo Qing took a sip of the local sake, eyeing Teresa calmly. "How did you know I'm good?" Ah! Teresa lowered her head, fidgeting nervously. She couldn't understand why he wasn't spending the night with the Raiden Shogun and had returned to catch them instead. Master. I was just guessing. You were guessing? Or would you like to find out for yourself? Ah! Is that an option? Teresa's eyes widened with surprise. Frustration value +1 from Luo Qing. What kind of subordinate always wants to jump their boss's bones? Tomorrow, you'll perform a 2-hour dance in front of the statue of the omnipresent god. Public square style. Ah! Yes, master. Frustration value +1 from Teresa. Ignoring Teresa's crestfallen expression, Luo Qing turned to Natalia. Natalia, seems like you have a habit of peeking at me in the mornings, hey? Natalia looked embarrassed. It wasn't like she wanted to see anything. But being the one responsible for managing Luo Qing's daily routine, sometimes the morning situation was hard to miss. Master. It's not like I did it on purpose. Wait, what happened to your face? Did someone hit you? Frustration value +1 from Luo Qing. Don't ask questions you're not supposed to. Tomorrow, you'll join Teresa for the dance. Ugh. Frustration value +1 from Natalia. Igor, Sergey, you two think this is funny, don't you? You're joining them. Frustration value +1 from Igor. Frustration value +1 from Sergey. All right, sit down. Understood, master. After hearing their punishment, the four finally dared to sit. They raised their glasses in a toast, drinking the strong Snezhnayan liquor with a renewed sense of respect. No matter what, their master was still alive and well, not facing execution. That was definitely worth celebrating, and they raised their glasses high. Chapter 122, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 122. After a long night of drinking, celebrating the survival of their leader, morning arrived quietly for the group in the safety of their hideout. Luo Qing awoke, feeling a weight on his chest. Blinking the sleep away, he found his view entirely blocked by dark purple hair. Teresa lay sprawled across him, drooling on his chest while one of her legs rested suggestively on his thigh, rubbing against him even in her sleep. A satisfied, almost lewd expression adorned her face. Luo Qing sighed. He distinctly remembered her being passed out from drinking too much last night. How had she managed to crawl onto him in her sleep? Carefully, Luo Qing pushed her off, his hand slipping into his pants for a moment to check. Nope. Doesn't seem like I've been tampered with. It wasn't the first time Teresa had made advances on him, clearly enamored with his physicality. But Luo Qing had to admit, her persistence was getting ridiculous. Scanning the room, he found the others sprawled out in various positions on his floor. It seemed everyone had simply passed out where they'd been drinking, with no one making it back to their own rooms. Not wanting to wake them, Luo Qing stood up and quietly slipped out of the room. As he passed by Rosalin's room, he noticed something strange. Her door was wide open. Where did she go? Luo Qing frowned. It wasn't like Rosalin to leave her room, especially if she didn't have a mission. Had something come up while he was distracted last night? And then it hit him yesterday marked the last day of their agreement. His absence at Tenchikaku had probably caused Rosalin to move forward on her own. This woman. Does she always have to be so damn punctual? Luo Qing muttered to himself, rushing toward Tenchikaku. He couldn't afford to let Rosalin meet with the Raiden Shogun just yet. If she went ahead with the meeting and struck some sort of deal, it'd ruin his plans entirely. Rosalin was prideful and independent, making it hard enough to sway her loyalty away from the Tsaritsa. If she struck an accord with the Shogun and retrieved the Gnosis, convincing her to switch sides would be nearly impossible. To bring her fully under his control, Rosalin had to experience defeat firsthand and sever her ties with the Fatui. Only then could he offer her salvation and have her indebted to him completely. He needed to act fast. At Tenchikaku, Rosalin strode confidently, led by attendants through the hallways. Today was the day she would complete her mission and return to Snezhnia with the Raiden Shogun's Gnosis. The ship back was already prepared, and by tonight, she would be on her way home. The doors to the throne room swung open, revealing the Shogun seated regally on her platform, her eyes closed in meditation. Rosalin took a deep breath, steeling herself. The moment their eyes met, an icy chill ran down her spine, a brief tremor of fear. But it passed quickly. She wasn't here as a supplicant, she was here representing the Tsaritsa. She had no reason to be cowed. As she stepped forward to announce herself, her vision suddenly blurred. In the blink of an eye, Rosalin found herself no longer standing in Tenshikaku. She was on an island surrounded by ocean. What the? Rosalin's confusion lasted only a moment as she felt a hand on her waist. She immediately recognized the sensation she was being carried over someone's shoulder. Luo Qing, you bastard! Rosalin shouted angrily, slamming her knee into his back. She pushed herself off him, landing gracefully a few steps away. Her face was a mixture of fury and confusion. The 2 months are up. What do you think you're doing? She snapped, crossing her arms as icy mist began to gather around her. Luo Qing smiled casually, unfazed by her anger. Sorry, Rosalin. I've still got some unfinished business. You can't meet the Shogun just yet. Who are you to decide that? Rosalin's voice dripped with venom, her regal posture exuding power. Ice began to spread across the ground beneath her feet. Our agreement is complete. You have no right to interfere now. Power crackled around her, a visible frost emanating from her body. She had tolerated Luo Qing long enough, now it was time to show him that her patience had run out. Luo Qing, however, remained calm, folding his arms across his chest. Relax. I just need you to wait a little longer. Trust me, it's not the right time yet. Wait. Rosalin's glare intensified, the cold around her sharpening like a blade. I'm not in the mood for your games, Luo Qing. Either move, or I'll make you move. The ground beneath them crystallized with ice as Rosalin's fury reached its peak. Sorry, but no can do, Luo Qing replied nonchalantly, his hands still crossed. This is your last chance, Rosalin warned, her patience clearly at an end. Either get out of my way, or you'll regret it. She raised her hand, the air growing even colder. Bring it on then, Luo Qing teased. He wasn't intimidated, if anything, her temper only amused him. Humph! You asked for this. Rosalin's hand slashed through the air, and a towering pillar of ice shot toward Luo Qing. Chapter 123, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 123. A frigid ice spike whistled through the air. But in the next instant, just as the spike was about to strike, a rocky ridge abruptly appeared in front of Luo Qing, shattering the ice. Luo Qing glanced at the shards of ice on the ground and casually remarked, "Oh my, Lady Rosalin, getting impatient already." Humph! I've been wanting to beat you up for a long time. Rosalin shouted angrily. She raised her hands, summoning more ice spikes from the sky that hurtled towards Luo Qing. But, without exception, every spike was crushed by the stone ridges Luo Qing summoned. You've certainly been hiding your strength, Rosalin muttered, frowning. During the previous officer selection, Luo Qing barely won using that emotion-manipulating ability. Yet now, he was wielding geo powers with ease. Adding in his time-stopping ability, she couldn't even fathom how many secrets he was still hiding. Indeed I have. What's the matter? Is Lady Rosalin getting scared? Afraid of you? With that, Rosalin's aura flared even stronger. She floated in mid-air, the ice element condensing around her to form an icy robe. The freezing element covered the entire island, as if intending to freeze everything in its grasp. A bone-chilling ice storm swirled around Luo Qing, yet it failed to faze him in the slightest. With his own cryovision, coupled with his natural resistance, the cold barely bothered him. In the next moment, countless ice spears formed around Luo Qing, then, with a mere thought from Rosalin, accelerated towards him. "Tch, tell me, Lady Rosalin, why must you do this?" Luo Qing looked up at Rosalin floating in the sky and let out a light chuckle. The entire island's time abruptly froze, and the ice spears halted mid-air, suspended as if paused by an unseen force. Luo Qing gazed at Rosalin, shaking his head slightly, and walked out from the encirclement of ice. He then retrieved a rope he had prepared earlier from his inventory and approached Rosalin, who remained helpless in mid-air. Grabbing her by the ankle, he pulled her gently back to the ground. With Rosalin's eyes widening in shock, Luo Qing methodically tied the rope around her body, loop by loop. Too bad her outfit made it a bit inconvenient, otherwise, Luo Qing would have tried something like a tortoise-shell bind. Meanwhile, Rosalin could vaguely sense Luo Qing's actions. Yet, within the frozen world of his time stop, she could do nothing but feel the rope's pressure as it wrapped around her, leaving her utterly defenseless. Once Rosalin was securely bound, much like he had with Yellen before, Luo Qing slipped a pair of cuffs onto her fingers that suppressed elemental energy. Then he removed her high heels, applying another pair of cuffs to her toes. He paused, as if something was still missing. After a brief thought, he pulled a rag from his inventory, pried open Rosalin's mouth, and stuffed the cloth inside. Perfect. Luo Qing nodded with satisfaction, then released the time-stop domain. MMM. Rosalin, now tied up like a bundle, writhed furiously on the ground, her eyes burning with fury as she glared at Luo Qing. Realizing that even her shoes had been removed, her glare only grew more intense. Though Luo Qing couldn't decipher what exactly Rosalin was trying to say through her muffled sounds, judging by her expression, it was probably not very polite. Come now, Lady Rosalin, why make things so difficult for yourself? If you had cooperated, we wouldn't be in this situation, would we? Luo Qing feigned a sigh. Rosalin continued to struggle. Frustration value from Rosalin plus 10. I had no choice, Lady Rosalin. You can't curse my entire family now the deed is done. Don't worry, I'll take responsibility for this. Luo Qing grinned mischievously. Frustration value from Rosalin plus 10. So, for now, you'll just have to bear with it. Don't worry, I'll provide plenty of light novels to keep you entertained. With that, Luo Qing wrapped an arm around Rosalina's slender waist, hoisted her onto his shoulder, and was about to leave. But then he remembered something, turned back, and grabbed her discarded high heels before heading toward Inajima City. In the early morning sunlight, Luo Qing's silhouette resembled that of a bandit chief who had just abducted a bride. Hanamizaka. After some time, Teresa and her companions finally awoke. Noticing Luo Qing's absence, they didn't think much of it and began tidying his home. After a night of heavy drinking, the room was in utter disarray. They had just finished cleaning up when heavy footsteps echoed from downstairs, accompanied by a faint, muffled female groan. Curious, they moved to check, only to see Luo Qing entering with Rosalin slung over his shoulder. What shocked them even more was that the esteemed Lady Rosalin was bound from head to toe, with her hands and feet in cuffs, barefoot, and a gag firmly in her mouth. Considering how much they'd all drunk last night, they had to wonder, did their master, Luo Qing, get carried away while drunk and do something inappropriate to the lady next door? Her clothing was in such disarray. They must have had a fierce fight, right? Master, this is... Natalia hesitated, speaking softly. After all, Rosalin held the highest position among the Fatui forces in Inajima, and their master had tied her up like a bundle. If this got back to Snezhnia, it could lead to significant trouble. It's fine. Luo Qing set Rosalin down on the tatami mat and continued. Lady Rosalin specifically requested this treatment. Right, Lady Rosalin. Frustration value from Rosalin plus 10. If looks could kill, Luo Qing would have been torn to pieces by Rosalina's furious gaze. Luo Qing, Lady Rosalin seems to want to say something, Natalia timidly suggested. Oh, does she now? Feigning ignorance, Luo Qing turned to Rosalin with a look of feigned surprise. You're all mistaken. Lady Rosalin herself asked for this. She said she wanted to play some sort of game. Isn't that right, Lady Rosalin? Frustration value from Rosalin plus 10. You see? She's nodding. All right, you all can leave now, Luo Qing waved dismissively. You four did well last night. When this is over, I'll reward you accordingly. But for now, Natalia, you and the others keep an eye on those samurai. Understood? Yes. Master Luo Qing. Knowing better than to disobey, Natalia and the others nodded, even if they clearly saw their master had forcibly restrained Lady Rosalin. But since Luo Qing said nothing, they kept their silence. Natalia cast a worried glance at the bound Rosalin and hesitated before asking again. What about Lady Rosalin? Luo Qing smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, I'll take care of Lady Rosalin myself. For some reason, Natalia found those words rather unsettling. Chapter 124, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 124:30 PS. Natalia and the others had to return to guard the samurai, so they didn't stay long in Inajima City. After finishing 2 hours of plaza dancing with Teresa, they left Inajima. Soon, the safe house was left with only Luo Qing, Teresa, and the tightly bound Rosalin. With Lumen off on Watatsumi Island with no clear return date, Luo Qing knew he couldn't keep Rosalin tied up forever. After all, she was technically a colleague, and had even spoken a few good words on his behalf to the Tsaritsa. Luo Qing preferred to reason things out rather than forcefully restrain someone unless, of course, Rosalin chose to resist. Finding an excuse to send Teresa off to play on her own, Luo Qing carried Rosalin back to her own room, dropping her onto the tatami mat. He then shut the doors and windows tightly, drawing the curtains. Sitting down in front of Rosalin, he spoke in a calm tone. "Now, Lady Rosalin, how about we discuss our cooperation again?" The only response was Rosalin's glare, a look that promised 1,000 cuts. "No need to be so fierce. If you obediently follow my lead, everything will be fine when you meet the Raiden Shogun later, won't it?" Luo Qing chuckled, not minding her expression at all, as he casually removed the gag from her mouth. "Luo Qing, do you have any idea what the consequences of your actions will be?" Rosalin's voice was icy. If it weren't for the cuffs on her wrists and ankles suppressing her elemental energy, she would have fought him tooth and nail. "And what consequences would those be?" Luo Qing leaned back casually. "Lady Rosalin, didn't you say it yourself? Among the Harbingers, it's not uncommon to have a bit of conflict, right? Besides, if you had cooperated a bit more, we wouldn't be in this mess, would we? Since I arrived in Inajima, you've been stalling me, preventing me from meeting with the Raiden Shogun. What, do you want the gnosis for yourself?" Rosalin's gaze was icy, fixed on Luo Qing. In Liyue, she had thought Luo Qing's personality had merely changed. But now, his strength and demeanor made it clear he was a completely different person. Everyone had their motives. In Inajima, the only thing of real interest was the mysterious location of the gnosis. She doubted Luo Qing was stalling her for mere amusement. "I have no interest in that." Luo Qing shook his head, leaning forward slightly until his face was closer to hers, his eyes reflecting her image. "But you, Lady Rosalin, you are very interesting to me. You wouldn't dare." Rosalin's eyes widened, a flicker of fear igniting deep within her. What did he mean by that? Could he really be after her? What's there to not dare? Seeing Rosalin's misunderstanding, Luo Qing's mischievous side kicked in, deciding to play along. "It's just the two of us here in this room. Who would know? Or do you think, Lady Rosalin, that anyone's coming to rescue you?" "Ha ha ha." Frustration value from Rosalin +10. Luo Qing, if you dare lay a finger on me, I swear I'll never let you go even if it costs me my life." Rosalin's tone was cold and unyielding. She was, after all, a warrior of purity, standing firmly against any humiliation. "Ha ha ha, Lady Rosalin, do you really think, with the gap in our strength, that staking your life would make any difference? Don't worry, even if you died, I'd still find you useful, ha ha ha." Luo Qing's face contorted into a villainous grin, a look that no mere novice could imitate without having seen dozens of twisted stories. "You?" Rosalin's fierce facade cracked, fear flashing through her eyes. Instinctively, she shrank back a bit, as if Luo Qing's words had truly struck a chord. She had never considered such things in her long life. Was she really going to be at his mercy? "Oh Lady Rosalin, could it be that you're a first-timer?" "Ha ha ha, don't worry, I'll be gentle, it won't hurt at all." As he spoke, Luo Qing stood and approached, hands moving to his belt as if to make good on his threat. Don't come any closer." At this point, Rosalin's once proud demeanor was in tatters. She tried desperately to summon her elemental power, but the cuffs on her wrists and ankles rendered her abilities useless, leaving her helpless. Watching Luo Qing's slow, deliberate approach, she instinctively turned her head away, curling into herself and inching backward, desperate to put distance between them. But her back soon pressed against the wooden wall. She had nowhere left to retreat. After a tense few moments, Rosalin noticed that Luo Qing had stopped moving. Turning back, she saw him sitting where he had been, leisurely sipping tea, watching her as if enjoying some private show. "What are you?" Rosalin was utterly bewildered. "What, you expected me to really take off my pants?" Luo Qing burst into laughter. Frustration value from Rosalin +10. Realizing she had been thoroughly tricked, Rosalin's face flushed with both shame and rage. You dare to make a fool of me?" Her face was a mix of fury and embarrassment. She had to admit, even with all her previous bravery in the face of death, the mere implication of intimacy had shaken her far more than she would ever have anticipated. Meanwhile, Luo Qing himself was just as surprised by her reaction. Given her fearless reputation, he had expected her to stay indifferent. How had such a simple implication made her react so intensely? Could this really be the weakness of a warrior devoted to purity? I wasn't lying, Lady Rosalin, I genuinely find you fascinating, Luo Qing said, his smile gentle now. Remember what I asked you before? If you weren't serving the Tsaritsa, what would you want to do? You want me to serve you instead? Rosalin scoffed, do you really think you're worthy? If that's how you see it. Luo Qing leaned back with a grin. Then I suppose I'll really take off my pants now. Frustration value from Rosalin plus 10. What was with this guy? Why did he keep making everything about taking off his pants? If only her elemental energy weren't being suppressed, she wouldn't have to endure this humiliation. Then again, it's not like she could have beaten him even at full strength. But that's a matter for later. Let's focus on the present, Luo Qing said with a chuckle. Now, Lady Rosalin, you have two choices. I can untie you, allowing you to move freely around Inajima City. But you can't negotiate with the Raiden Shogun without my permission. Or, you can stay bound here, being fed and tended to until I decide it's time to release you. Which do you prefer? Humph, you're so confident I won't sneak off to meet the Raiden Shogun. Rosalin sneered. Of course. I trust that Lady Rosalin keeps her word. Luo Qing replied, leaning in close, his voice lowering to a whisper. But if you really did try to defy me, the consequences would be unpleasant. He wasn't joking, even the Raiden Shogun herself was under his influence now. If Rosalin dared to seek her out, he could easily have the Shogun tie her up again and deliver her right back to him. This was his Inajima. How did she think she could fight him? Chapter 125, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 125-40 PS. In the end, Rosalin chose to compromise, agreeing not to seek an audience with the Raiden Shogun without Luo Qing's permission. But deep down, an imprint of fear settled in her heart, a fear of Luo Qing. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, Rosalin found herself reluctant to speak loudly in his presence, as if worried that doing so might provoke him, and he really would take off his pants. With no negotiations to be had and no way to leave Inajima, Rosalin had little to do but stay cooped up in her room, passing the time with light novels like she used to. In the past, if Luo Qing dared to disturb her, she would immediately storm out and scold him. Now, at the sight of him, she only wished to hide away, not daring to raise her voice. On the other side, Luo Qing was somewhat surprised by Rosalin's compliance. Seeing her lock herself away, he thought little of it and headed out to the Tenchikaku to remind the Raiden Shogun not to meet with Rosalin for the foreseeable future. Just as he entered Hanamizaka, debating whether to pick up some snacks and light novels for Lumen, he bumped directly into Kamisato Ayaka. Standing in the middle of the street, Ayaka blocked his path, not moving or saying a word. Eventually, Luo Qing broke the silence with a smile. Well, long time no see, Miss Kamisato. Where are you headed? Ayaka looked up at Luo Qing, a strange sense of guilt welling up inside her. Counting the last incident, she had twice now avoided seeing Luo Qing, pretending indifference. Yet he had taught her swordsmanship, saved her retainers in a critical moment, and even helped protect Tama's vision, only to be imprisoned in the Tenchikaku himself for his troubles. The weight of his kindness made her regret her previous behavior. Last night, she heard from her retainers that Luo Qing had appeared in Hanamizaka, so she decided to seek him out today to express her gratitude for saving Tama. She had also resolved that, no matter what her brother said, she would no longer avoid Luo Qing. This time, she chose to trust him and to trust her own instincts. Master, if it's not too much trouble, may I invite you to Komor Tea House for a chat? Ayaka's voice was soft as she glanced at Luo Qing's left wrist. Sure enough, just as Lumen had mentioned, he was still wearing that blue and red braided bracelet. Hey! Luo Qing stared at Ayaka, genuinely baffled. Mostly due to Kamisato Ayato's influence, this young lady had been hot and cold with him multiple times since they'd met. But no matter the circumstances, he had always treated Ayaka kindly. Was it really enough for her brother's words to make her avoid him? Everyone had their limits. Being treated so inconsistently had certainly affected Luo Qing's attitude. After all, he was a scoundrel. It was time for Ayaka to experience a bit of the scoundrel's strategy. Sorry, Miss Kamisato, I'm busy right now. How about we meet another day? Luo Qing gestured towards the Tenchikaku, indicating he had matters to attend to and no time for a casual chat at the tea house. Ayaka was taken aback, clearly not expecting his refusal. To her knowledge, this was the first time Luo Qing had ever turned her down. Was he really busy, or was he angry about how she had treated him before, and thus refused her? Tea tonight is fine too, master, the Kokomi tea house is always open to you, whenever you wish. Let's leave future matters for the future, Miss Kamisato. I have things to do. See you next time. Bye. Luo Qing smiled lightly, patting Ayaka on the shoulder. Without giving her a chance to respond, he stepped past her and continued on his way to the Tenchikaku. Ayaka turned around to watch his retreating back, her expression conflicted. As the representative of the Yashiro Commission, she was no stranger to handling all kinds of social events and rituals. She knew perfectly well what Luo Qing's words meant. He wasn't busy, he simply didn't want to see her. In that moment, she felt a heaviness in her chest, a sudden urge to cry. She really shouldn't have hesitated back then. Not even offering an apology or explanation, what had she been thinking? Left without any options, Ayaka returned to the Kokomi tea house alone. As soon as she stepped inside, before she could even sit down, Toma appeared from the kitchen, apron tied around his waist. You're back at last, Miss, where's Mr. Luo Qing? Didn't he come back with you? Toma's confusion was obvious. Wasn't his lady supposed to invite Luo Qing over for a hot pot game? Why had she returned alone? Mr. Luo Qing said he was busy, so he couldn't make it. Oh, that's all right. Hot pot games can be played anytime, whether he comes tonight or in a few days. But Toma's words trailed off. He noticed that Ayaka's face had gone pale, like a wilted lavender melon, and he wouldn't have been surprised if she burst into tears the next second. Since he had joined the Kamisato clan, this was the first time he had seen Ayaka so heartbroken. This wasn't about Luo Qing being busy. It was a clear-cut rejection, cold and final. Oh, no. Just yesterday, he had seen the look of sheer joy on Ayaka's face upon hearing Luo Qing was safe. She had even gotten up early this morning, encouraged by him to go invite Luo Qing for a game of hot pot, saying she wanted to properly thank him and maybe tease him a little. Toma wasn't a conservative person. After hearing about Luo Qing's past from Ayaka and knowing how he had saved him, regardless of Luo Qing's background, they owed him a proper expression of gratitude. But now, Ayaka had been rejected, and it seemed like a total dismissal with no room for reconciliation. The emotional impact must have been devastating. Miss, about Mr. Luo Qing. Toma spoke softly, worried that even a slight rise in his tone would make Ayaka cry. Toma. Ayaka sat down, knees drawn up to her chest, hugging them tightly as her face sank into utter dejection. Did I really make a mistake? Chapter 126, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 126:50 PS. Tenchikaku. The Raiden Shogun sat regally atop her elevated seat, reviewing war reports submitted by the Tenryou Commission. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the room. Her hand, which held the document, trembled slightly. Turning her head awkwardly, she looked behind her and spoke softly. What are you doing here? I missed you. Is that a good enough reason? Without any hesitation, Luo Qing settled beside the Raiden Shogun, casually wrapping an arm around her waist. The Shogun's entire body felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and the papers in her hand wavered unsteadily. What are you reading? Luo Qing snatched the document from her grasp, flipping through it. It was a report from the front lines at Tatarasuna. The summary was straightforward: with the travelers and the Liyue mercenaries' assistance, the resistance had recently gained momentum, and the shogunate's forces were struggling to keep up. The report requested reinforcements, suggesting it would be ideal if the shogun herself could make an appearance. Are you going to go? Luo Qing asked. No. The Raiden Shogun shook her head, adding, it's not yet the time for me to act personally. Her duty was to govern Inajima, maintaining stability. Although she had nominally granted Watatsumi Island autonomy, she still considered it part of Inajima's domain. Thus, she wouldn't intervene unless absolutely necessary. Did you come here to see her? The Raiden Shogun's voice lowered. Or is it that you need something from me again? In her memory, Luo Qing had never come to see her without a reason. When their rapport had been low, she hadn't felt much jealousy. But now, with her fondness for him nearing 60, only 7.5 points away, she couldn't help but feel a sting of envy. Now, why would you think that? Can't I visit just to spend time with my beloved Shogun? Luo Qing chuckled softly, speaking without a hint of shame. It was as if he had completely forgotten that his real purpose here was to discreetly ask the Raiden Shogun to avoid meeting with Rosalin for a while. The Raiden Shogun lowered her head, a blush spreading across her cheeks. But I do have a small favor to ask. Frustration value from the Raiden Shogun +1. She knew it. Luo Qing had always seen her as a tool to be used. What is it? Clearly, the Shogun's expression darkened slightly. Remember my colleague, the one I carried off yesterday? The envoy from Snezhnaya, the lady. Yes, her. Luo Qing nodded, then continued, could you avoid meeting with her for a while? No matter what she says, just ignore her. Why? Aren't you two colleagues? The Raiden Shogun asked, puzzled. Is that a problem? Luo Qing chuckled. Even colleagues can compete for achievements, right? Besides, the two of us have never really gotten along. Understood. The Raiden Shogun gave a small nod, like a bird pecking at grain. Until you give permission, I'll suspend all diplomatic interactions with the Fatui. Thanks, my dear Shogun. Luo Qing affectionately ruffled the Raiden Shogun's hair, but then, feeling unsatisfied, he playfully pinched her cheek. Though she showed signs of becoming a yandere, as long as Luo Qing managed her affection carefully, the Shogun and, by extension, Ei were practically like wives to him, minus the cooking skills. Meanwhile, in the plain of Euthymia, Ei furrowed her brow while reading a light novel, sensing the interactions between Luo Qing and the Raiden Shogun. Being linked with the Shogun as twin souls, Ei experienced all of her counterparts' sensations and shared her vision. Watching Luo Qing's unabashed caresses all over the Raiden Shogun's and, by extension, her own body, she almost stormed out to punch him, telling him to get his hands off her. If he kept touching, she might have to, well, she definitely couldn't let him keep doing it. However, feeling the Raiden Shogun's current reaction, a hint of worry flickered through her mind. When Ei had first created the Raiden Shogun, she had intended for her to have no unnecessary emotions. Her purpose was to maintain the eternal rule over Inajima, preserving the status quo indefinitely. Yet somehow, Luo Qing had managed to stir genuine emotions within the Shogun. Even she herself had been affected whenever she saw Luo Qing, her heart raced uncontrollably. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before all of Inajima bore Luo Qing's name. After some contemplation, Ei decided that she had to intervene before things spiraled out of control. Elsewhere, Luo Qing's hands moved confidently, pulling the Shogun into a tight embrace, thoroughly indulging in the moment. He had figured it out, as long as he didn't cross any forbidden boundaries, the Raiden Shogun wouldn't resist. She would simply remain still and feel. His hands ran along the Shogun's slender, pale arms, savoring the unique fragrance of her skin. Luo Qing suddenly remembered that if he hadn't instinctively tried to undress her last time, he might have already claimed the Shogun's first kiss. This time, he wouldn't fail. Their eyes locked, both seeming to understand the other's intent. Luo Qing's arm snaked around the Shogun's waist, while his other hand gently cupped her face. Their faces drew closer, inch by inch. But just as Luo Qing was about to seal their lips in a kiss, the Raiden Shogun suddenly placed a finger against his mouth. She wants to see you. Frustration value from Luo Qing +1. There's no rush. Let's kiss first, he said. And no. The Raiden Shogun stammered, embarrassed. She said if you go any further, she'll come out and cut that off. Frustration value from Luo Qing +10. Now he understood where the system's yandere traits had come from. Ei wasn't bluffing, she really meant it. Just as Luo Qing began to silently curse, the Raiden Shogun raised her hand. Before Luo Qing could make another move, she cast him into the plain of Euthymia. In an instant, the scenery changed, and Luo Qing found himself in the plain of Euthymia, facing Ei, who was lounging by a bookshelf, engrossed in a light novel. What do you want? Luo Qing's expression turned dark. If he weren't outmatched by Ei, he would never have allowed such an opportunity to slip away. Don't push your luck. Ei's voice was calm, her eyes remaining fixed on her book. She didn't even bother looking directly at him. What's this, are you jealous? Jealous? Ei snapped her book shut, staring at Luo Qing with an intense expression. Was she jealous? Could she even feel jealousy? Okay, maybe she could, just a little. Feeling a strange emotion within herself, Ei's cheeks flushed as she looked away. Don't get cocky. One day, when I break free of your emotional manipulation, I'll bury you in a statue. So, what you're saying is that you haven't managed to break free yet. Luo Qing stepped closer to Ei and, just as he had with the Raiden Shogun, reached out to pat her on the head. Don't touch me. Ei slapped his hand away, stepping back with a look of disdain. He wanted to pet her just like he did the Shogun? Shameless. So, why did you call me here? Need more light novels? Or did you finish all the sweets? I'm just here to warn you, don't push your boundaries. Ei's voice was cold. I can feel everything you do to the Shogun. If you ever dare try something like that again, I swear I'll cut that off. Chapter 127, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 127 ps. Bonus chapter. Dash. You could feel that too. Luo Qing was momentarily stunned. If Ei could feel his touches on the Raiden Shogun, then if he went all the way with the Shogun, Ei would also experience it in the plane of euthymia. What kind of twisted play was that? After a moment's thought, Luo Qing tentatively asked. Are you sure you're not saying this because you're jealous? Jealous? Of the Shogun? It was as if Luo Qing had struck a nerve. Ei's reaction was almost explosive, and she looked one step away from drawing her blade against him. Don't overestimate yourself. All right, if you say you're not jealous, then you're not. Luo Qing said soothingly. But, just from Ei's expression, he could tell. She was definitely jealous that he was about to kiss the Raiden Shogun. This got Luo Qing thinking. If he got close to the Shogun, Ei would get jealous. But what if he got close to Ei? Would the Raiden Shogun get jealous? If the two of them were jealous of each other, wouldn't that mean that, once their fondness increased, any romantic gesture with one of them would risk him being stabbed to death by the other? For the sake of his future happiness and safety. Now was the best time to confirm it, before things reached full-blown Yandere territory. For a moment, Luo Qing gazed at Ei, who pretended to be engrossed in her light novel, ignoring him. A bold and audacious idea formed in his mind. Hey, can you look up at me for a moment? Luo Qing asked in a calm voice. What is it? Ei raised her head, glancing at Luo Qing. Puzzled, she saw him suddenly activate his time zero to its highest amplification. Before she could react, he wrapped an arm around her waist, and his other hand reached behind her neck, pulling her close. Not going to let me kiss the Raiden Shogun, hey? Then I'll just kiss you. MMPH. Frustration value from the Raiden Shogun +1. Feeling the unexpected softness on her lips, Ei's eyes widened, clearly in disbelief. Luo Qing actually dared to kiss her. Did he have a death wish? Instinctively, she tried to push him away, but his grip was tight. One arm securely wrapped around her waist, the other hand gently cradling the back of her neck. Without using her divine power, she couldn't break free. MMPH. Their lips clashed, and Ei's mind went blank. In her thousands of years, this was the first time she'd experienced such a thing. Compounded by her 45 points of fondness, she had no idea how to respond and could only passively allow Luo Qing's kiss. She intended to get even with him after he was done. But a moment later, Ei's thoughts were disrupted again. A slight pressure on her teeth, and then a yelp from Luo Qing. Ow! Ow! Why did you bite my tongue? They finally parted, Luo Qing clutching his mouth in pain. Who told you to stick it in there? And? Ei's face was flushed, her brows furrowed, and with a flick of her hand, a purple musician blade materialized. You've got some nerve. In the Tenshikaku. The Raiden Shogun closed her eyes tightly, frowning as she felt everything happening within the plane of euthymia. After a while, Luo Qing was ejected from the plane of euthymia, his face covered in bruises, evidence of Ei's well-placed punches. Ugh! All that just for a kiss, and she hit me this hard. Luo Qing rubbed his injured face, surprised by the force of Ei's blows despite expecting retaliation. She had pushed him to the brink of death, metaphorically landing just short of a fatal strike each time. It was akin to slashing him dozens of times but leaving only minor injuries. Before Luo Qing could recover, the Raiden Shogun stood and approached him, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword. Why did you kiss her? Frustration value from Luo Qing +1. So, he had been right, the Raiden Shogun was jealous of Ei. Shogun, let me explain. No, Wait, let me clarify. There's nothing to clarify. After those words, the ceiling of the Tenchikaku resounded with the echoes of their ensuing clash. Moments later, Luo Qing lay on the shogun's lap, his bruises seemingly multiplied. After beating him thoroughly, the Raiden shogun had gently pulled him into her arms. If this wasn't yandere behavior, then what was? I'm sorry, my dear shogun. I was wrong. Luo Qing feigned a pitiful expression. Through this test, he now fully understood. No wonder the Raiden shogun had gone to such lengths to fight Ei after her ideals changed. The two were practically identical mirror images of obsessive yanderes. They could get jealous of each other, their creator and creation. What jealousy wouldn't they feel? If he were ever caught kissing another girl, he'd be in for a fate worse than death at their hands. No wonder the system had advised him to use affection points wisely. It was like having a deck of yandere cards. Whoever received those points would end up, well, yandere. For a moment, Luo Qing felt a bit lucky. At least Gomu and Shenhe were still far away in Liyue. Even if things developed with them, the Raiden shogun and Ei wouldn't catch him. As for Ayaka, she seemed safe for now. The Raiden shogun tenderly stroked Luo Qing's cheek, her expression overflowing with warmth. Seeing her gentle demeanor, Luo Qing thought about it for a moment and decided that, since things had already gone this far, there was no way he'd let the Raiden shogun beat him up for nothing. Pretending to struggle to keep his eyes open, he muttered softly. Shogun, it feels like there's sand in my eyes. Could you blow it out for me? Sand. The Raiden shogun, not catching on to his intentions, leaned closer to his face. Just as she was about to ask which eye to blow on, Luo Qing abruptly sat up. One hand cradled the back of her head, and the other cupped her cheek as he kissed her firmly. Frustration value from Ei +1. Feeling the softness of his lips, the Raiden shogun froze for a moment, caught off guard. She hadn't expected Luo Qing to kiss her so suddenly, leaving her completely unprepared. However, without Ei's interruption, she had originally intended to allow Luo Qing to do this, which is why she didn't resist. Instead, she attempted to match his rhythm, losing herself in the feeling of his breath mingling with hers. In that heated moment, Luo Qing couldn't resist letting his hand drift towards the Raiden shogun's sash. Frustration value from Ei +1+1+1. Chapter 128, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 128 200 PS. Bonus chapter. Dash. You're undressing me again. A crisp slap echoed through the Tenchikaku. The servants outside heard the commotion from within the room and froze, bewildered. Was that the shogun's voice? Did someone actually dare to undress the shogun? Shogun, is everything all right? One servant knocked hesitantly on the door, not daring to enter without permission. They feared seeing something they shouldn't and facing the shogun's wrath. It's nothing. Leave us. The Raiden shogun held both hands over her chest, desperately trying to prevent her neckline from slipping. At her feet, her deep red obi, tied with a delicate knot, lay in a crumpled heap. They had been so engrossed in the kiss that Luo Qing had managed to untie her belt without her noticing. If not for her quick reaction to grab her clothes, she might have been completely exposed to him. Understood. The servant's voice trailed off as they retreated. After the servant left, the Raiden shogun turned back, glaring coldly at Luo Qing. This man had now pulled off his tricks twice in a row. He definitely needed to be taught a lesson. Without hesitation, she clutched her collar with one hand while summoning her blade with the other, slashing it at Luo Qing. But, with her kimono loosened and no true intent to kill, the slash seemed more like a shy girl's awkward gesture than a lethal attack. I'm sorry, Shogun. Luo Qing dodged the strike, hastily pressing his palms together in a gesture of apology. I promise I won't undress you next time. Next time. The Shogun swung her blade at him again, but he managed to evade it once more. Ahem, Shogun, aren't you tired holding your clothes with one hand while swinging your sword? Luo Qing quickly shifted the topic. After 2 consecutive slashes, her kimono, now without the support of a belt, had slipped slightly. The lavender fabric sagged, exposing her bare shoulders and back, barely covering her front. Her pale skin peeked through with each movement, creating an entrancing sight. The Raiden shogun glanced down at her attire, realizing just how unseemly it had become. She froze, caught between embarrassment and indecision. As the ruler of Inajima, she couldn't allow her servants to enter and assist her in dressing. It would be far too humiliating. But she couldn't retie the belt by herself. Shogun, you don't know how to tie an obi. Luo Qing leaned forward, his voice curious. Frustration value from the Raiden Shogun +1. You should have said so. Seeing her embarrassed silence, Luo Qing was sure she genuinely didn't know how to tie it. Tying the sash of a woman's kimono was indeed a tricky task, requiring a certain level of skill if done alone. Given that her creator couldn't even cook, it was no wonder she lacked this particular skill. How about I help you with it, Shogun? Luo Qing offered, picking up the belt from the floor and waving it teasingly. His unspoken threat was clear: refuse, and he'd walk off with her obi. The Raiden Shogun furrowed her brow, weighing her options. Luo Qing's hands were anything but trustworthy, and he might try something inappropriate again. Only the belt. You're not allowed to touch anywhere else. She held her sword in front of him, her tone low and firm. Of course. Luo Qing smiled, nodding in agreement. But tying a belt without touching? That would be quite a challenge. All right, Shogun, turn around. I'm going to tie the obi now. The Raiden Shogun hesitated for a moment before complying, still watching him warily. She reluctantly turned her back to him. Okay, now raise both arms. She shot him a sharp look over her shoulder. If she raised both arms, the kimono would fall to the floor. Ahem, just one arm will do. Luo Qing corrected himself, a little embarrassed. Humph. The Raiden Shogun huffed, turning away and raising her right hand. With a deft motion, Luo Qing draped one end of the sash over her waist, wrapping it around and threading it back through the other side. Hold still, Shogun. I need to pull it tight. She turned again, eyebrows raised. I mean, I need to tie the belt. What else did you think I meant? Luo Qing asked, feigning innocence. The Raiden Shogun's face betrayed her confusion. Wasn't he the one who had been taking liberties just moments ago? Having spent enough time in Inajima, Luo Qing had learned the basics of the culture. He had practiced tying obis on Teresa back in the safe house, so by now, his skill was impeccable. In just a few smooth motions, he had tied the Shogun's sash, finishing with a neat bow. Yet, with such a rare opportunity to be so close, Luo Qing couldn't resist prolonging the moment. He carefully moved her deep violet hair to one side, revealing her smooth back. Her skin was soft and unblemished, almost like porcelain, with the faint markings of her electro tattoos trailing down from her neck. Coupled with her unique fragrance, it was all too tempting. The Raiden Shogun gasped in surprise as she felt Luo Qing's hands press gently against her waist and back. What do you think you're doing? Just measuring your waist, Shogun? Who measured waistlines like that? Before she could react further, Luo Qing rested his chin on her shoulder and blew softly into her ear. A shudder ran through the Shogun's body, a sensation like a jolt of electricity spreading from her neck down her spine. Savoring the fragrance at her neck, Luo Qing felt a sense of pure satisfaction. It really was better from behind. After holding her close for a while, he finally released her with a reluctant sigh. Today, he had only intended to have a quick chat with the Shogun, but he ended up with far more than he'd anticipated. A truly unexpected gain. Do you have any other business? If not, then, you should leave. The Raiden Shogun's face was still flushed from his touch. Her body, merely a puppet, wasn't designed to handle such stimuli. If Luo Qing stayed much longer, she feared she might lose her focus, abandoning her pursuit of eternity. Oh, is the Shogun trying to kick me out already? Luo Qing teased, settling himself casually at her desk and pulling out the war report from Tatarasuna. The Raiden Shogun sat beside him, watching as he scanned the report, and asked. Why are you reading that? It's nothing. I'm just curious about that traveler. Oh. A hint of displeasure colored her voice. By the way, Luo Qing continued, how about giving me a small official role? I could go check out the front lines at Tatarasuna. He figured he might as well join in on the action at Watatsumi Island. Perhaps he could earn some extra frustration value from the clashes between the resistance and the shogunate's forces. You want to go to Tatarasuna? The Raiden Shogun's brows furrowed. If Luo Qing went to the front lines, that meant she wouldn't see him for quite some time, not that she cared, of course. Well, Shogun. Luo Qing leaned closer, his tone teasing. Chapter 129, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 129 4? P. B. News, Ha, Tur. The next morning. After a whole night of Tama's encouragement, Kamisato Ayaka finally pulled herself together. She had resolved not to let Luo Qing's status as a member of the Fatui get in the way of mending their relationship. If one invitation didn't work, she would try a second time. If the second attempt failed, she would try a third. And if that didn't work, well, she'd just wear her tracksuit and... Ahem, in any case, as long as Luo Qing remained in Inajima City, Ayaka was determined that her sincerity would eventually reach him. Today, Ayaka was preparing to extend a second invitation to play the hot pot game with Luo Qing. Back when Luo Qing had been confined in the Tenshikaku, she'd had some conversations with Teresa and the others, who had told her where Luo Qing lived. Yesterday, she had planned to go to his safe house, but fate had brought them face to face halfway there. So today, with renewed courage and determination, Ayaka followed the directions Teresa had given her to Luo Qing's safe house. The so-called safe house was actually a small inn, secretly constructed by the Fatui. It was not open to the public and was reserved exclusively for Fatui personnel. Winter Solstice Inn, this is the place. Ayaka stared at the sign, taking a deep breath before pulling aside the curtain and stepping inside. The inn's front desk was unattended, and there was no one to ask, so Ayaka made her way upstairs. Teresa had provided the exact room number, so Ayaka knew she could find Luo Qing's room without asking anyone. Reaching the second floor, she carefully checked the numbers on each door, searching for his room. 207, this is it. Standing in front of the door, Ayaka took a deep breath and knocked. She waited, but there was no response from the other side. Pressing her ear to the door, she listened. There was only silence. It seemed no one was inside. He's not here. On a whim, she tested the doorknob to see if it was locked. To her surprise, the door swung open. But the scene inside froze Ayaka in her tracks. A richly dressed woman was lounging on the tatami mat, one hand propped under her head, the other holding a light novel. The table beside her was covered with milk tea and desserts. Their eyes met, and both were stunned. Rosalin, mid-sip, stopped drinking her milk tea. Ayaka quickly bowed her head, apologizing. I'm sorry to disturb you. May I ask, does Mr. Luo Qing live here? Luo Qing? Rosalin frowned. What's the Kamisato heiress doing here, looking for Luo Qing? He left this morning. You missed him. He left. Ayaka was shocked. Why hadn't Luo Qing mentioned anything to her yesterday? Could you please tell me where Mr. Luo Qing went? Ayaka's face was crestfallen. Last night, Toma had assured her that if she showed enough sincerity, she'd win Luo Qing over. But now he was gone. No amount of sincerity could change that. How should I know? Rosalin's tone grew impatient. She was right at the climax of her light novel, and Ayaka's sudden arrival had broken her concentration. From the look on Ayaka's face, Rosalin guessed she was another girl caught in Luo Qing's web. Feeling mischievous, she decided to scare Ayaka a bit. He's not from Inajima, is he? It's not unusual for him to leave. For all you know, he might have gone back to Snezhnaya to avoid you and isn't planning to return. Not coming back. Ayaka's face paled. She'd momentarily forgotten that Luo Qing was from Snezhnaya. That was his real home. He could leave for it at any time. After all, Snezhnaya and Inajima were on opposite ends of Teyvat, a journey that would take months to complete. And if Luo Qing left, he might never return to Inajima. Was yesterday their final encounter? A wave of regret washed over Ayaka. Why hadn't she tried harder to make him stay? Do you need something else? If not, don't interrupt my reading. Rosalin's voice was cold, yet seeing Ayaka's dazed expression only reinforced her suspicions. So it was true, this Kamisato girl had a thing for Luo Qing. I apologize for the intrusion. Ayaka nodded politely, then gently shut the door behind her as she left the inn. As she walked away, Rosalin's words echoed in her mind, for all you know, he might have gone back to Snezhnaya to avoid you. It seems that Mr. Luo Qing is truly upset. Even his friends are making excuses for him. I just want to see Mr. Luo Qing again. Meanwhile, at the port outside Inajima City. It seemed that sweet words whispered in a lover's ear were the hardest to resist. After much persuasion, playful teasing, and gentle cajoling, Luo Qing had finally convinced the Raiden Shogun to grant his request. She had bestowed upon him the title of Great General of the Vanguard, granting him unrestricted access to Tatarasuna. Moreover, she had sent one of her most trusted subordinates, Qiu Sara, to accompany him. Officially, it was to aid Luo Qing in liaising with the shogunate forces on the front lines, but in reality, it was to keep a close eye on him and make sure he didn't cause too much trouble. As for Sarah, when she learned she was to accompany Luo Qing to Tatarasuna, her emotions were a mess. But the order had come directly from the shogun herself. She had no choice but to obey and become Luo Qing's assistant. Remembering their last collaboration during the Tenryu Commission's training exercises, Sarah felt a surge of complicated emotions. Luo Qing was unlike any normal person. His shamelessness was beyond measure. She couldn't understand what the shogun saw in him. Now, Sarah stood at the harbor, staring at the horizon with a troubled expression, unsure when she would return from this journey. "Sarah, why do you look like you've swallowed something bitter the moment we set off?" Luo Qing, walking over with Teresa, put on a serious tone. "When we travel, we should be in high spirits. A cheerful attitude makes the journey so much more enjoyable." Frustration value from Qiuzhao Sarah +1. Sarah gave Luo Qing a glance, choosing to ignore him and returned her gaze to the sea. "Isn't it boring to just stare at the ocean? How about we talk about something fun? Like the shogun's daily hobbies, how about it?" The trip to Tatarasuna would be long, and he was eager to have some fun. The shogun's hobbies. A flash of excitement crossed Sarah's face, quickly replaced by a calm demeanor as she pretended to be indifferent. "Mr. Luo Qing, I'm listening." "Oh, the shogun's hobbies are quite a secret. I'll need a trade if I'm going to share them." "Trade? What do you want? How about joining Teresa and me for some plaza dancing?" Chapter 130, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 130. After several days of sailing, Luo Qing's support fleet finally arrived at the Qiuzhao encampment in Kanazuka. Qiuzhao Sarah had come to the Tatarasuna front lines not only to keep an eye on Luo Qing but also to carry out a mission assigned by the Raiden Shogun. The traveler from Liyue had allied with the resistance, and one of her tasks was to pressure the rebels into handing over the traveler. Luo Qing had even assured the shogun that, if necessary, he would assist in capturing Lumen. That promise had earned him the title of Great General of the Vanguard from the Raiden Shogun. Of course, whether he would actually follow through was entirely up to him. A fleet of troop transports docked at the port below the Qiuzhao encampment, and hundreds of shogunate reinforcements disembarked, making their way to the camp. For Inajima, a deployment of hundreds was considered a significant force, and this reinforcement was crucial for the shogunate's efforts, potentially decisive for the outcome at the front. Waiting at the docks was Qiuzhao Masahito, an officer of the shogunate stationed at the Qiuzhao encampment. When he saw Qiuzhao Sarah and her entourage disembark, he hurried over to greet them. "Lady Qiuzhao Sarah, welcome to Tatarasuna," Masahito said respectfully. Although they both hailed from the Qiuzhao clan, Sarah was an adopted daughter, and she held the position of a high-ranking general. Thus, he maintained the proper respect, without any presumptuousness based on family ties. "And who are these two?" Masahito glanced curiously at Luo Qing and Teresa, feeling a strange sense of familiarity about them. "This is Mr. Luo Qing, the great general of the vanguard, appointed personally by the shogun." "And his bodyguard?" Sarah said coolly, a hint of puzzlement crossing her face. She still couldn't fathom how Luo Qing had managed to gain such a peculiar title from the shogun. Great General of the Vanguard. Suspicion flickered across Masahito's face. Was it because the shogun had noticed their lack of progress at the front that she had sent both Sarah and this great general to Tatarasuna? "Yes, the great general of the vanguard," Luo Qing said, his eyes narrowing as a secretive smile spread across his face. "The shogun told me that if I see any sign of cowardice or reluctance in battle, I'm free to cut you down with a single stroke." Frustration value from Qiuzhao Masahito +1. Now he was certain the shogun must be dissatisfied with their lack of success at the front. Otherwise, why would she send Qiuzhao Sarah to take over command and dispatch a great general specifically to oversee the battlefield? "I would never dare. I will serve the shogun with my life." Masahito dropped to one knee, speaking with utmost reverence. In truth, due to the persistent corruption in Tatarasuna caused by the Tatarigami, both the resistance and the shogunate had been hesitant to fully engage, fearing they'd lose strength before the battle even started. But recently, the Tatarigami seemed to have mysteriously vanished, prompting a surge in the intensity of the front lines. The travelers' presence had bolstered the resistance's combat capabilities significantly, and without the expected reinforcements, the shogunate's forces had been struggling, nearly losing control of Tatarasuna. "All right, get up. I don't go around chopping people up for no reason. Why are you so scared?" Luo Qing chuckled lightly, looking innocent and harmless. Once Masahito had risen, Luo Qing strode towards the Qiuzhou encampment, flanked by Qiuzhou Sarah and Teresa, who walked like two loyal secretaries at his sides. Masahito trailed behind, a small figure filled with confusion. Isn't Qiuzhou Sarah supposed to be the general? Why is Luo Qing leading the way? But since Sarah remained silent, Masahito refrained from speaking up. Instead, he followed them around the camp, giving them a tour and explaining their daily drills and the latest reports from the battlefield. Afterward, Sarah conveyed the Raiden Shogun's decree. She was to assume full command of Tadarasuna's defense, leading the war effort against the resistance. Luo Qing found all the formalities tedious and was just about to sneak out for a walk when a shogunate soldier burst into the room, addressing Masahito with urgency. "Sir, news from the front. The resistance has broken through the Nazuchi Beach defensive line and is advancing toward Tatarasuna. The defenses at Tatarasuna urgently need reinforcements." "So soon?" Masahito was shocked. "It's that wanted criminal again, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. That outlaw is incredibly strong. None of our warriors can match them in single combat, and morale among the troops is plummeting, so..." "I understand. You are dismissed." Masahito frowned and turned to Qiuzhou Sarah. "Lady Qiuzhou Sarah, what are your orders?" With Sarah holding the rank of general, it was her decision to make. "Humph, we've been merciful enough not to hunt them down, now they have the audacity to attack us." Sarah's eyes flashed with resolve. She gave Masahito a swift command. "Relay my orders. All units are to march to Nazuchi Beach immediately. I want to see just how much faith they've placed in that traveler." With her command, the entire Qiuzhou encampment sprang to life, preparing for battle. The shogunate soldiers, accustomed to following orders from the Tenryu Commission, knew Sarah's reputation for decisive action. Though exhausted from their long journey, the reinforcements rested only half a day before joining the soldiers of the Qiuzhou encampment, heading out to reinforce Nazuchi Beach. A few days later, Nazuchi Beach. Before Lumen had joined them, the resistance had always been at a disadvantage against the shogunate due to their smaller numbers and inferior equipment. But with Lumen's help in recent battles, they had managed several key victories, raising the morale of the resistance forces. Taking advantage of this momentum, the resistance leader, Goro, learned that the shogunate's defenses were thin and decided to launch a surprise attack on Tatarasuna, hoping to break their defensive line. Gathering several dozen elite fighters, Goro moved out at dawn, aiming to surprise the shogunate forces. After knocking out a few sleeping sentries, the resistance infiltrated deeper into Tatarasuna, drawing closer to the ruins of the Mikage furnace, the site of a catastrophic explosion in the past. Leading his team into the heart of the area, Goro was preparing to search for the shogunate's encampment when he spotted something unexpected. Not far from the reservoir, a man and a woman in traditional clothing were standing near the floating Mikage furnace, seemingly discussing something. "Civilians." Goro frowned slightly. Hadn't the intelligence reports said that all civilians had been evacuated from Tatarasuna? Why were there still people here? Though he sympathized with the plight of the locals, caution prevailed, and he decided to subdue them first and question them later. Signaling his men to advance, Goro led them in a silent approach, encircling the pair. As he drew closer, he overheard snippets of their conversation. "Mr. Luo Qing, since when does the great general of the vanguard arrive before the main force? Why are you here so early just to take some pictures of that thing?" Teresa asked, looking puzzled. "You don't understand, do you? The early bird catches the worm. See, they're already here, aren't they?" Luo Qing gestured with a nod. Teresa followed his gaze and saw Goro and his elite resistance fighters, who had encircled them without them even noticing. Chapter 131, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 131. "They're from the shogunate. Everyone, get them." With just a few words, Goro had come to a conclusion. The two people in front of him were definitely from the shogunate, and judging by their attire, they seemed to be of some rank. If they could capture them, it might serve as leverage in negotiations, or at the very least, they could exchange them for some of their own captured comrades. At his command, the elite resistance fighters surged forward, spears raised, surrounding Luo Qing and Teresa. From their perspective, Luo Qing looked like an official dressed in a kimono with no visible weapons. Clearly, he was no warrior. "Hey, isn't it a bit rude to just attack like that, General of the Resistance?" Luo Qing didn't seem to mind the soldiers encircling him, his gaze drifting lazily to Goro. "Humph! We can talk about manners once you're captured. Attack. Goro had no intention of showing mercy on the battlefield. The moment he confirmed that the two were with the shogunate, they were his enemies. And he would not go easy on an enemy. At his signal, the resistance soldiers charged at Luo Qing. But in the next instant, their spears vanished from their hands, flung away, and their stomachs were struck with a force that sent them to the ground. They cried out in pain as they collapsed. Watching his subordinates drop to the floor, Goro tightened his grip on his shortbow, eyes fixed coldly on Luo Qing. Everything had happened too fast before he could even react. His soldiers were downed. This is a powerful foe. I can't take him head-on, Goro thought, sizing up Luo Qing. He whistled sharply, and the scattered resistance fighters regrouped around him. In moments, the elite force of about 80 men completed their encirclement, tightening the formation around Luo Qing and Teresa. With so many elite fighters, he refused to believe this Luo Qing could handle them as effortlessly as before. Did you only bring this many people for an attack? Luo Qing looked around, counting their numbers. Including the soldiers he had just defeated, there were no more than 80 in total. This is what they call a resistance? Oh, right, this was Inajima, where the population was smaller. Charge! Goro ignored Luo Qing's taunts, drawing back his bow and firing several geo arrows in quick succession. The other fighters readied their formation and lunged at Luo Qing. Well, since the main force is still on its way, I might as well have some fun with you. Luo Qing mused with a faint smile, a plan already forming in his mind. In the next moment, his figure vanished. Then, just like before, all the resistance fighters collapsed simultaneously, each writhing on the ground in agony, just like the initial wave. Only Goro remained standing, staring in disbelief. You, how? Goro's eyes were wide, stunned beyond words. How had this man named Luo Qing managed to down his entire force in an instant? Well, you're the only one left. Do you have any reinforcements? Luo Qing asked casually. Not that it mattered to him, more reinforcements just meant more frustration value to collect. Humph! I'll take you down myself. Goro roared, drawing his bow and releasing a barrage of geo arrows, then charging forward in a desperate rush, hoping to catch Luo Qing off guard. But the next moment, Luo Qing appeared directly in front of him. All right, little doggy, no more struggling now. You. Before Goro could react, he felt a sudden weight in his eyelids. His vision went dark, and he lost consciousness. When Goro awoke, he found himself tied up along with the rest of his captured fighters, dumped behind the shogunate's defensive line. Shogunate soldiers patrolled back and forth, keeping a close watch on them. He attempted to manipulate the Geo element and break his bonds, but despite still having his vision, he found himself completely powerless. Lord Goro, you're awake. Lord Goro, what should we do now? Should we make a break for it? The resistance fighters, seeing their general awake, began to murmur anxiously. Don't act rashly. Let's assess the situation first. Goro spoke quietly, studying his surroundings. Soon after, Luo Qing approached them, a casual smile on his face. Well, looks like everyone's awake. He stood before the prisoners, eyes locking with Goro's. Do you want to go home? I can give you a chance. Humph, as if I'd believe you. The shogunate is full of liars. Goro spat. Luo Qing's smile didn't falter. Instead, he chuckled lightly. These men are some of your finest, aren't they? If they die here, how heartbroken would your lady Sangonomiya be? Would you really make her watch you all perish? What do you want? Goro's voice was tense. Just a small favor. If you cooperate, all of you can go home. You can keep resisting the shogunate if you like. Luo Qing's tone was teasing. Never. I won't make a deal with you. Goro's rejection was firm. Tisk, well, don't blame me for what happens next. Luo Qing signaled to a nearby guard. The guard barked orders, forcing the captured resistance fighters to their feet, arranging them into a neat formation. Teresa stepped forward, dragging out a large gramophone with clear reluctance. She pressed the play button, then positioned herself in front of the prisoners. A familiar, catchy tune began to play. Dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. In the vast expanse of the world, flowers bloom beneath the mountains. Luo Qing's eyes gleamed as he spoke. All right, everyone, follow her and dance. Those who refuse will face severe punishment. The resistance fighters fell silent, their expressions incredulous. Who on earth would dance for you? What kind of joke is this? I'm not dancing to some ridiculous song. One of the soldiers yelled, but his defiance was short-lived. A pale yellow rock pillar struck him square on the forehead, knocking him out cold. Luo Qing continued to smile at the rest, his expression seeming to say, this is what happens when you don't dance. Lord Goro. Helpless, the other fighters looked to Goro for guidance. Frustration value from Goro +1. Goro's face twisted in reluctant frustration. Finally, he ground out. Everyone, just dance. We need to preserve our strength if we're to continue fighting the shogunate. With a stiff, awkward motion, he began to mimic Teresa's dance steps. The others had no choice but to follow, joining in the humiliating routine. For a brief moment, the shogunate's defensive line was filled with a bizarrely cheerful dance, though the expressions of the dancers were nothing short of mortified. Chapter 132, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 132 DDD. December double drop. Dash. 2, 2, 3, 4 again. By the end of the day, the resistance soldiers had spent nearly every waking moment either dancing to plaza music or practicing the moves. By dusk, including Goro, every single one of them had almost been brainwashed by the relentless tunes coming from the gramophone. Even in their sleep, they dreamed of Luo Qing's booming voice echoing in their minds. The resistance had fought the shogunate countless times before. Captured prisoners were usually subjected to harsh interrogations or thrown into the most secure prisons. This was the first time they had encountered a punishment that involved dancing. Luo Qing was a peculiar man, to say the least. But Luo Qing didn't care about what the resistance thought of him. His sole goal was to collect frustration value. With every round of plaza dancing, the resistance soldiers added dozens of frustration points to his total. In just one day, he had already accumulated 540 points. With the main forces still several days away from reaching the defensive line, he was determined to make the most of the time. By the end of the day, under Teresa's careful instruction, all 80 of the captured resistance fighters had mastered the basics of plaza dancing. They could now follow the music without needing Teresa to lead. As night fell, Luo Qing decided to show a rare bit of mercy. For the evening, the resistance soldiers were allowed to rest no more dancing until morning. They needed to conserve their energy to continue the next day. Late into the night, as the shogunate's patrols shifted guards, Goro awoke from his light slumber. As a vision bearer, he retained enough strength even after a day of dancing, while most of the others were utterly exhausted. Goro carefully surveyed his surroundings, confirming that Luo Qing was nowhere to be seen within the defensive perimeter. Exchanging a glance with a few nearby resistance fighters, they slowly began to rouse each other while keeping a close eye on the shogunate sentries. Within moments, they quietly worked to free themselves from the ropes binding their hands. By now, it was the dead of night, and the shogunate guards were already drowsy. They didn't notice the movements among the prisoners. Within minutes, Goro's bindings and handcuffs were undone. He cautiously manipulated his geo power, summoning several makeshift stone weapons, which he distributed to the nearby resistance fighters. Just as the shogunate's patrol completed their shift change and the new guards were still half asleep, Goro led his team in a swift, silent assault. In a matter of seconds, they had taken down the guards without making a sound. They had never feared the shogunate soldiers, only Luo Qing. With him absent, these guards posed little threat to elite fighters like them. Lord Goro, what are your orders? One of the resistance soldiers whispered urgently. We retreat. We have to report everything to Lady Sangonomiya. That man, Luo Qing, is incredibly dangerous. We must be cautious. Goro replied in a low voice. Leading the resistance fighters, they moved under the cover of darkness, aiming to escape from Tatarasuna and return to the camp at Nizuchi Beach. Within a short time, the group slipped past the shogunate's defenses. Just 2 more hours of walking, and they would be back at the resistance camp. But just as Goro and his men thought they had successfully escaped, several pillars of stone suddenly erupted from the ground, blocking their path. Hey, now! Luo Qing's figure emerged from the shadows, standing in their way. Leaving without saying goodbye? How rude! How did you? Goro's face darkened, his mind racing for a solution. Luo Qing was far too dangerous. With him supporting the shogunate, their forces would be at a severe disadvantage. It was imperative to get someone back to report to Lady Sangonomiya so she could prepare a counter-strategy. Go back to your sleeping bags now, and I'll pretend this never happened. Luo Qing said calmly. To him, these people were walking sources of frustration value. There was no need to kill them, but they did need a reminder of who was in charge. Humph! We won't go back. Goro's eyes flashed with defiance. He turned to his comrades, his voice ringing out clearly. Everyone, scatter! Someone must make it back to Lady Sangonomiya with the information. At his command, the resistance fighters hesitated for just a second before splitting up, running in all directions under the cover of darkness. There were 80 of them. No matter how fast Luo Qing was, Goro didn't believe he could catch them all. As long as one person made it back, their sacrifice would be worth it. 80 people scattered in all directions, and Goro, the only vision holder, stayed behind to cover their retreat. He watched as Luo Qing slowly closed his eyes. Confused, Goro wondered what Luo Qing was doing. Then, in the next moment, Luo Qing's eyes snapped open, glowing like molten gold, fierce and unyielding. Then he vanished. What followed was a blur of movement, a ghostly figure darting among the fleeing resistance fighters. In less than a minute, all but Goro were down on the ground, clutching their stomachs in agony, groaning in pain. This time, Goro was genuinely shaken. Such strength, it seemed only Lady Sangonomiya could match him. But she wasn't here at the front lines. What could they do? Well, it's just you left. Will you return on your own, or do I have to make you? Luo Qing said, standing directly in front of Goro, eyeing his fluffy ears and tail with an expression that made him want to tug on them. Too bad he's not a southerner. I'll never surrender. But before Goro could finish, his vision faded to black. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was lightning. The now familiar music from yesterday played in the background, jolting him fully awake. Looking around, Goro realized he was at the edge of Nazuchi Beach, just an hour's walk from the resistance camp. The weather was clear, and he could even make out the distant outline of the tents. Oh, you're up! Luo Qing's voice came from nearby. Turning his head, Goro saw his men standing in formation, just like the previous day, stripped to the waist, wearing only large shorts and staring back at him with expressions of solemn determination. Is he planning to execute them? Panic surged within Goro, and he was about to beg for mercy. But then Luo Qing's voice rang out again. Gentlemen, if you don't want your precious Lord Goro sold off to be a host, completely exposed and having his ears and tail toyed with, then you'd better put on a good performance. Goro froze as if struck by lightning. Frustration value from Goro +1. Sell him off to be a host. There was no way he would agree to something like that. But the somber expressions of his subordinates suggested that Luo Qing might be very, very serious. What exactly do you want? Goro snarled, never having felt so humiliated in his life. Well, isn't it obvious? Luo Qing gestured to the assembled soldiers. In the next moment, the resistance fighters turned to face the camp on the far side of Nazuchi Beach, wearing only their shorts as they began to dance. The infectious music blared once more from the massive gramophone. The previously lonely beach was suddenly filled with cheerful and lively dance steps. Chapter 133, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 133 DDD. December double drop. Dash. At the resistance camp. Lumen and Paimon had just returned from handling supply duties, arriving once more at the front lines. But before they could even enter the camp, they heard a familiar tune echoing from the direction of Tatarasuna. It was a melody that tugged at the edges of their memories. They had heard it somewhere before. Confused, they pushed forward, entering the camp. They found the resistance soldiers clustered at the defensive perimeter, gripping their weapons, expressions furious as if something on the other side had ignited their anger. What's going on, everyone? What's happening over there? Paimon floated into the crowd, ready to ask what was happening, when she overheard snippets of conversation. Damn it! Those shogunate bastards have gone too far. How dare they do that to our comrades? Yeah, I can't believe they made Lord Goro dance like that. And in just his underwear. It's too much. Everyone, how about we charge over and rescue them? Calm down. It's probably a trap set by the shogunate. Even if there are only a few of them, they're definitely lying in wait. Rushing in would just play right into their hands. Exactly. In this situation, we should look at the contingency plans Lady Sangonomiya left behind. But, we've already used up all of Lady Sangonomiya's plans. That's right. For a moment, the fiery spirit of the resistance seemed to falter. Suddenly, Someone noticed Lumen and Paimon, and a cry of joy rang out. It's the traveler. Thank the gods, you're finally here. Hey! Lumen blinked in surprise. Traveler! Please, you're the only one who can save Lord Goro. Another voice called out, filled with desperation. In an instant, all the resistance soldiers, hearing that the brave traveler had returned, crowded around Lumen, pleading with her to rescue their leader. Wait, slow down. Just tell us what happened first, okay? Paimon said, trying to calm the frantic crowd. It's like this. One of the soldiers stepped forward, recounting the events of the day. Early that morning, strange music had drifted from across the beach at Nizuchi. It caught the attention of the resistance guards, who were on duty. What they saw was shocking. The very squad that had gone to Tatarasuna on a surprise attack the day before was now back, standing at the far end of Nizuchi Beach, wearing nothing but large shorts, performing an odd and embarrassing dance. Even their esteemed leader, Lord Goro, was only in his shorts, leading the dance at the front. It wasn't just a dance, it was a blatant insult to the resistance and Lady Sangonomiya. There were only a man and a woman supervising the scene, yet Goro and the others showed no sign of trying to escape. This made the resistance hesitant to act, fearing a trap. So, they had pinned their hopes on the golden-haired traveler standing before them. Wait, you're saying that someone in the shogunate is forcing Goro and the others to dance and humiliate themselves? Paimon asked, confused. Isn't this supposed to be a war? Why is there suddenly a dance battle? Can I take a look? Lumen said calmly, though her mind was racing. For some reason, the mention of a strange dance reminded her of a certain eccentric harbinger. Here, use this telescope. You can see Lord Goro and the others from here. One of the soldiers handed a telescope to Lumen. She took it and scanned the distant shoreline. On the other side, standing at the front of the formation, was Goro, wearing only a pair of light brown shorts. His face was as dark as an onikabuto, leading a group of 79 soldiers through a bizarre and familiar dance routine. This dance? Lumen felt a strange sense of déjà vu. It looks just like that dance Luo Qing's subordinates did back in Liyue on Yujing Terrace, wearing those same ridiculous shorts. And the song, it sounded like Luo Qing's voice. Curious, Lumen adjusted the lens, panning the telescope further back. Just behind the dancing formation, there was a man wearing sunglasses, reclining on a lounge chair, sipping fruit juice and basking in the warm sunshine of Nizuchi Beach. A woman stood nearby, like an attendant or secretary. Teresa. Lumen gasped, recognizing the Electro-Chechen mage. They had crossed paths a few times before, and she could never forget Teresa's distinctive appearance. If that strange Electro-Chechen mage was behaving so deferentially, then there was no doubt about it. The man in the sunglasses had to be Luo Qing. Wasn't he supposed to be a harbinger? What was he doing representing the shogunate now? For a moment, Lumen was at a loss for words. Well, traveler, can you help us? One of the soldiers asked again, desperately. This. Lumen's face betrayed a flicker of hesitation. She couldn't exactly admit she knew the man who was lounging around drinking juice and sunbathing while their comrades were forced to dance. I'll go and see what's going on. Wonderful. But please be careful, traveler. It could be a trap. Right. Not long after, Lumen steeled herself and, with Paimon floating by her side, headed toward the other end of Nizuchi Beach, where the bizarre dancing formation awaited. Paimon's eyes widened as they neared, the scene leaving her utterly speechless. She flitted back and forth among the dancers, shouting for them to stop, but no one acknowledged her. Seeing Lumen's approach, Goro and the others looked utterly embarrassed, but they continued to move in perfect sync with the music, not daring to break the rhythm. If they stopped, Luo Qing's punishment would surely follow. Lumen's gaze met Goro's for a moment, his eyes filled with desperation. His lips silently formed the words. Run! Lumen shook her head slowly, took a deep breath, and resolutely walked towards Luo Qing's sunny retreat. All the while, the dancers couldn't help but glance at her, but they kept dancing, the movements relentless. Standing in front of Luo Qing, Lumen spoke evenly. Luo Qing, did you make them do this? She waited for a response. But after a long moment, there was only the sound of soft snores from under the sunglasses. Frustration value from Lumen +1. Frustration value from Paimon +1. Beside him, Teresa couldn't hold back any longer. She tapped Luo Qing's shoulder and whispered. Master Luo Qing, wake up. The traveler's here to ruin the fun. Teresa knew firsthand how formidable Lumen was. If she really intended to cause trouble, Teresa alone wouldn't be enough to stop her. They needed Luo Qing awake. Who's causing trouble? Luo Qing bolted upright, yanked off his sunglasses, and found himself staring at Lumen and Paimon, both glaring at him with their arms crossed. Oh, well, if it isn't the famous Lumen and Paimon. What a coincidence. You're here to enjoy some sunbathing too. Who would want to sunbathe with you? Paimon fumed, stomping her tiny foot. Luo Qing, you're the one making Goro and the others dance in their underwear, aren't you? Yep. Luo Qing replied nonchalantly. What, you want to join them? Chapter 134, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 134. Who wants to join in this ridiculous dance? Luo Qing, let them go right now. Paimon shouted, hands on her hips, her little face flushed with frustration. But Luo Qing remained lounging in his chair, slipping his sunglasses back on without so much as a glance her way. Relax, I'll send them back in a few days. But for now, they're still useful to me. Useful? You mean making them dance here is useful? Lumen asked, confused. Is this another one of your Fatui schemes? Don't jump to conclusions. Luo Qing raised his head and pulled out a sealed document from his pocket, speaking with an air of authority. I'm now officially a Shogunate General of Surveillance. I represent none other than the great Raiden Shogun herself. These are my prisoners of war, and I haven't done anything cruel to them. Just making them dance a little. What's the problem? Shogunate General of Surveillance. Lumen and Paimon exclaimed in unison, clearly struggling to believe his claim. Surprised? Luo Qing replied with a righteous tone. The Shogun and I, well, we hit it off. It's perfectly reasonable for me to oversee the front lines on her behalf, wouldn't you say? Lumen was speechless for a moment. She had no idea which parts of Luo Qing's story to believe anymore. If you're just here to convince me to release them, then you can go back. He continued, waving them off. I've already said it, I'll let them go in a few days. But what do you gain from this? Lumen pressed. I already told you, it's because of my deep bond with the Shogun. Or, what, are the two of you thinking of making a move against me? What should we do? Paimon fretted, caught in a moral dilemma. If Luo Qing hadn't intervened back then, Lumen might have ended up sealed in a statue, and she never would have met Goro. They owed him a huge debt. Attacking Luo Qing over this seemed wrong. Ugh! Lumen was equally torn. She glanced back at Goro and his men, who were all staring at her while still moving to the maddening beat. Even she was struggling to keep a straight face in the face of such an absurd scene. If she decided to rescue them, she'd have to fight Luo Qing. Whether she could even win was uncertain, and there was also the uncomfortable fact that he had once saved her life. But if she left them here, she would be breaking her promise to the resistance camp. So, what's it going to be? Planning to take me on? Luo Qing asked lazily, still sipping his fruit juice. If Lumen made a move, he wouldn't mind stepping in to make her part of the dance troupe as well. Will you really let them go? Lumen asked softly, after careful consideration, unable to raise her sword against him. Do I look like someone who breaks his word? I'll go back to the camp and tell them you'll release Goro and the others in a few days. Lumen said, her voice low. I hope you keep your promise. Of course. Luo Qing smiled, adding, oh, and while you're at it, let them know that if anyone else wants to join in, they're more than welcome. Lumen was at a loss for words. She had witnessed Luo Qing's power firsthand, how he defeated both Ozil and Baisht single-handedly. No one in the resistance could hope to stand against him. In all of Watatsumi Island, only the late serpent god Orobashi could have matched him. Let's go, Paimon. We're heading back. Lumen shook her head, casting a glance at Goro before turning and walking back towards the resistance camp. Luo Qing joining the Shogunate and appearing on the front lines was a serious problem for the resistance. Not long after, Lumen returned to the camp, only to be swarmed by a group of furious men. Traveler, what happened to Lord Goro? Are they torturing our comrades on purpose? Traveler, are you friends with that man? Calm down, everyone. Lumen's face was clouded with mixed emotions as she spoke. Luo Qing, the man lying in the chair, he said he would release Goro and the others in a few days. What? Does that mean Lord Goro and the others are going to be humiliated like this for several days? They're only 2 people, how can they act so high and mighty? No way, I'm going to rescue Lord Goro right now. A hot-headed soldier grabbed his spear, ready to rush out, but Lumen stopped him. No. Luo Qing is incredibly strong. If you go, you'll only end up like Goro and the rest. How strong could he be? We have so many people. There's no way he can handle all of us at once. Ugh, he's probably on the same level as your serpent god. Lumen said awkwardly, after a moment of thought. Her words struck the resistance soldiers like a bucket of cold water, and they all fell silent. The resistance had always been outmatched in terms of strength compared to the shogunate. They relied on Lady Sangonomiya's brilliant strategies and Lord Goro's battlefield command to stay in the fight. Now, with someone as powerful as a god on the enemy's side, they felt a wave of despair. Then, "Traveler, can you?" Someone ventured timidly, their last hope pinned on Lumen. "It was Luo Qing who saved me from the Raiden Shogun. That's why I was able to escape and come here. Besides," Lumen admitted, "I can't beat him." With those words, the spirits of the resistance sank even lower. "Are we just going to stand by and watch?" Someone muttered angrily. "What if that Luo Qing guy never lets them go?" Lumen had no answer. All she could do was try to reassure the soldiers, urging them to trust Luo Qing and wait for Goro's return. The next day, Goro and his 80 men danced together in the morning, then rotated in shifts for the afternoon sessions. The bizarre music filled the air over Nezuchi Beach from dawn till dusk. Even the nearby pirates couldn't help but grumble, saying this was a war. What's with the psychological warfare? By nightfall, the exhausted resistance soldiers lay sprawled on the ground, too drained to move. After the first 2 failed escape attempts, none of them dared to try again, even without being bound. Luo Qing seemed to have an omnipresent gaze. Whenever they showed the slightest intention to flee, a rock pillar would fall from the sky, blocking their path. Days turned into a week. Every morning, Goro and the captured soldiers would dance on Nezuchi Beach, stopping only at dusk. By now, they were so conditioned that their bodies would involuntarily start moving whenever they heard the music's rhythm, like they had developed a compulsion. Thankfully, Luo Qing, despite his odd preferences, wasn't cruel. Aside from the mandatory dance sessions, he treated them fairly, even feeding them the same rations as the shogunate troops. In fact, over time, the captured resistance soldiers seemed healthier than they had been before their capture. This led them to wonder. Was Luo Qing training them for some greater purpose? Perhaps, preparing them to be sold as male entertainers. For a good price? Thanks for reading. Let me know if you spot any mistakes or inconsistencies. Posture and water check. Remember, this is a fan translation. If you wish to support me or read ahead, here's a link. patreon.com/wisetl right bracket. Comment. 6 comment. Vote. Chapter 135, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 135. Several days passed. From a distance, Luo Qing spotted the shogunate reinforcements led by Qiu Sera. He then glanced back at the neatly arranged line of resistance soldiers still dancing on Nezuchi Beach. With a casual wave, he turned off the phonograph. As soon as the music stopped, the resistance fighters halted their dance. But their bodies, still adjusting, instinctively turned to look at Luo Qing, as if asking, "Is it early dismissal today?" "Congratulations, you're free to go," Luo Qing said with a light smile. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled out the resistance fighters' clothes from his system inventory and tossed them onto the ground. To prevent them from escaping, Luo Qing had confiscated all of their gear from the second day onward, leaving them with nothing but their underwear. "Free to go?" Goro blinked in disbelief, wondering if Luo Qing was joking. "What's the matter? Have you developed feelings for me and don't want to leave?" Luo Qing teased, walking over and handing Goro a pair of binoculars. "Here, take a look." Goro raised the binoculars and followed Luo Qing's direction. In the distance, he saw a battalion of shogunate soldiers approaching, carrying banners, with Qiu Sera at the head of the force. "If you don't leave now, once they arrive, you really won't be able to leave." Luo Qing smirked. "You're really just going to let us go?" Goro was still in shock. Like the rest of the resistance fighters, he had half expected Luo Qing to sell them off as male entertainers. He was stunned to realize Luo Qing was actually keeping his word from a few days prior. "Don't want to leave?" Goro hurriedly grabbed his clothes and put them on, then shouted to the others. Everyone, we're heading back to camp. Goro knew very well the extent of Luo Qing's power. There was no reason for Luo Qing to play games with them. But if Qiu Sara arrived, there'd be no chance of them leaving. The men scrambled to find their gear and dressed quickly before following Goro, marching back toward the resistance camp. Luo Qing made no move to stop them, remaining relaxed in his chair, soaking in the sun. After all, he had already accumulated 3,028 points of frustration value. Humans have a threshold for frustration. Even the most irritating actions become numbing after a while, as the mind protects itself by becoming desensitized. By now, Goro and his men had reached that threshold, so there wasn't much more frustration value to milk from them. Letting them go would also help him score points with Lumen. Not long after, Qiu Sara's reinforcements arrived. She spotted Luo Qing still lounging in his chair, sunbathing, and couldn't help but feel exasperated. I've already been briefed by the soldiers. Qiu Sara said in a measured tone, you do realize releasing prisoners without authorization can be considered treason under shogunate law. Oh? So, are you planning to arrest me for treason, Lady Qiu Sara? Luo Qing teased, still basking in the sun without a care. I'm more curious, why do you always make them dance like that? Sara asked, recalling how Luo Qing had once made the trainees at the Tenryou Commission perform those strange dances. Now, even on the front lines, he had captured prisoners and forced them to dance. Did he have an obsession with watching people dance? What, do you want to dance too? Luo Qing raised his head, eyeing Sara as a new idea popped into his mind. Technically, he was in charge of the shogunate forces on the front lines. If that was the case, why not get the shogunate soldiers to join in on the dancing? How about we have the shogunate soldiers do 2 sessions of dance every day? I'll have Teresa teach them for free. Frustration value +1 from Qiu Sara. Frustration value +1 from Teresa. No, thanks. The shogunate army isn't here for your amusement. Tisk, if you didn't want to, you could have just said so. Luo Qing dismissed it with a shrug. He knew he didn't hold any real power. Qiu Sara was the one truly in command of the shogunate forces. Still, the thought of getting hundreds of soldiers to generate frustration points was tempting. Suddenly, Luo Qing's gaze shifted toward the distant resistance camp, and an idea began to form. How about becoming a double agent? All right, keep up the good work. I'm off to go fishing. With a glance toward Teresa, Luo Qing signaled for her to follow him, heading toward the shore. Meanwhile, at the resistance camp, the safe return of Goro and his men brought joy to the camp. No one had expected that Luo Qing would actually keep his promise and release Goro without further harm. Apart from a few minor injuries from the rock pillars, most of them were in surprisingly good condition. Lumen and Paimon had spent the past few days on the front lines, anxious about whether Luo Qing would honor his word. Seeing Goro return safely, they were relieved not having to be stuck in the middle anymore. After exchanging information with Goro about Luo Qing, Lumen and Paimon left the camp, intending to assist with logistics. Just as they stepped outside, a hooded figure appeared, blocking their path. Who? Lumen instinctively tightened her grip on her sword, wary. No need to be so hostile, it's just me. Luo Qing pulled down his hood, grinning. So, where are you two headed? We. Luo Qing, why are you here all of a sudden? Are you planning to attack the resistance camp? Paimon asked nervously. Relax, I'm not here to cause trouble. Luo Qing chuckled. You two support the resistance, right? Obviously. What are you up to this time? Paimon demanded, eyeing him suspiciously. Nothing much. I was just thinking about a little cooperation. How do you two feel about that? Cooperation? Lumen frowned. You're the shogunate's general of surveillance. What kind of cooperation are you talking about? I'm talking about helping you capture the shogunate soldiers and teaching them how to dance. What do you think? With my help, your resistance force's power would increase dramatically. Luo Qing rubbed his hands together, looking excited. Lumen was at a loss for words. As expected, she knew all too well that the Fatui were always up to no good. And why was Luo Qing so obsessed with making people dance? Did he have some strange hobby? Chapter 136, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 136 DDD. December double drop. Dash. Why come to us for cooperation with the resistance? Paimon asked, puzzled. Shouldn't you be speaking to Goro? He's the leader of the resistance, after all. Ahem, well, there were just a tiny few unpleasant moments between us last time, so I thought you two could help introduce me. Luo Qing smiled and added, as a thank you, I could arrange an introduction with the Shogun for you. How about it? Deal. Another introduction. Lumen hesitated. Ayaka had also promised to arrange an introduction before, but that only led to her becoming a fugitive, forced to flee to Watatsumi Island. Relax, my relationship with the Shogun is solid. With me around, there's no way she'd harm you. Lumen stayed silent, looking at Luo Qing's overly persuasive smile. She couldn't help but think, if your relationship is so great, then why did the Raiden Shogun chase you with her sword back at the Blood Moon? All right, I'll take your silence as agreement. Luo Qing quickly grabbed Lumen's hand, shaking it up and down vigorously. Here's to a successful partnership. Who said I agreed. Paimon stomped her foot angrily. I haven't even had a chance to say anything yet. How about I treat you to a super deluxe meal at Liyue restaurant later? Luo Qing suggested with a sly smile. There's a deluxe meal involved. As soon as food was mentioned, Paimon's demeanor changed. Her eyes lit up, and she nearly drooled at the thought. She tugged at Lumen's sleeve, whispering. Maybe, we should agree. After all, Luo Qing isn't a bad guy. Lumen put her hands on her hips, utterly exasperated. Why does my travel companion always fall for food? Was she a rice bucket in her past life? With a resigned shake of her head, Lumen said. I'll take you to see Goro, but whether he agrees to work with you is up to him. No problem. Let's not waste any time, off we go. Luo Qing said cheerfully, hooking an arm around Lumen's shoulders as they walked toward the resistance camp. It wasn't long before they arrived at the camp. At that moment, Goro was in the middle of a serious strategy meeting with his top officers, discussing ways to counter Luo Qing. Just then, one of his subordinates caught sight of Lumen leading Luo Qing into the camp. Luo Qing is extremely dangerous. Goro was saying, we need to inform Lady Kokomi as soon as possible, and until we know his weakness, we shouldn't take any risks. Lord Goro, behind you. One of the soldiers interrupted nervously, his eyes wide. Behind me. Goro looked up, confused. Then, he turned around and saw Lumen casually leading Luo Qing into the camp. He shuddered as a cold chill ran down his spine. Well, long time no see, Lord Goro. Luo Qing said with a playful smile, strolling up to Goro. Then he added. Have you kept up with your dance practice while I was away? Frustration value +1 from Goro. Why are you here? Goro's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the dagger hidden behind his back. No need to be so tense. I'm here to discuss cooperation, not to make enemies. Luo Qing grinned, then turned to Lumen. She hesitated for a moment, then awkwardly explained. Luo Qing says he can help you capture shogunate soldiers, but in return, he wants those captured to dance the same dance you did before. Humph, aren't you the shogunate's general of surveillance? Why are you suddenly interested in helping us? Why should we believe you? Goro shot back coldly, the recent memories of Luo Qing's training still fresh and painful. Oh? Lumen, didn't you tell them about my true identity? Luo Qing asked, feigning surprise. Well? Lumen hesitated, then looked at Goro. She explained quietly. Aside from being the shogunate's general of surveillance, Luo Qing is actually a trainee harbinger of the Fatui. Before she could finish, Luo Qing cut her off. Let's just go with harbinger, I'm practically about to be promoted. No need to bring up the trainee part. Frustration value +1 from Lumen. Fatui Harbinger. Goro repeated, his gaze on Luo Qing becoming more complicated. A significant portion of the resistance's supplies had come from Snezhnia, and cooperation with the Fatui wasn't uncommon behind the scenes. Moreover, he had heard rumors that the Fatui were manipulating events behind the Vision Hunt decree. What do you say, Lord Goro? Shall we cooperate? I remember that quite a bit of your military equipment and supplies were provided by us Fatui. Why not strengthen Watatsumi's ties with Snezhnia even more? Luo Qing's eyes gleamed as he spoke. Who knows? With my help, you might even have a shot at storming Narukami Island one day. Goro fell silent. His role was to lead the front lines, while decisions involving external parties had always been up to Lady Kokomi. Now, with her absent, no matter how tempting Luo Qing's words were, he couldn't make such a decision. Sorry, but I can't decide something like that. You'd better give up on. Before Goro could finish, a shout echoed from a nearby guard. Lady Kokomi has returned. Everyone turned to look. There she was, a pink-haired girl dressed in a deep blue ceremonial outfit, flanked by her attendants. Her twin tails fluttered as she approached gracefully. With her delicate features, gradient stockings, blue ribbons adorning her chest and ankles, and the sky blue gem nestled below her navel, Kokomi embodied beauty itself. Those slender legs, those gentle curves. Luo Qing's thoughts strayed for a moment. Forget eating, even a single whiff or touch could extend one's lifespan, he thought, catching himself. A lot of new faces, I see. Kokomi's soft voice brought him back to reality as she addressed Goro. Goro, aren't you going to introduce your new friends? Oh? You look a bit pale, are you feeling unwell? Kokomi's tone was gentle, but there was concern in her eyes. Lady Kokomi. Goro cast a nervous glance at Luo Qing. If Luo Qing made a sudden move against her, no one here could stop him. Before he could come up with an answer, Luo Qing stepped forward, his expression sincere. I've long heard about the brilliant Lady Sangonomiya Kokomi, the living deity of Watatsumi Island renowned for her wisdom and strategic brilliance. Seeing you today, it's all true. My name is Luo Qing. This is Lumen, and the little floating one here is Paimon. We're here to join forces with Watatsumi Island. Paimon? T/N, another victim. Thanks for reading. Let me know if you spot any mistakes or inconsistencies. Posture and water check. Remember, this is a fan translation. Chapter 137, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 137 DDD. December double drop. Lumen, Paimon, Luo Qing, nice to meet you. I am Sangonomiya Kokomi, the organizer of the resistance and the current divine priestess of Watatsumi Island. Kokomi nodded slightly to each of them, but her eyes lingered on Luo Qing with a hint of confusion. She had already heard about Lumen and Paimon from earlier reports, and her purpose for coming here was to meet them. But now, instead of two, there were three, with Luo Qing being the unexpected addition. Just as she was about to make polite conversation to draw them into the resistance, Goro suddenly interrupted. Lady Kokomi, about this Luo Qing. Goro's eyes darted towards Luo Qing with a complicated expression as he leaned in close to Kokomi. He truly couldn't understand how this man could stand here, openly fabricating such blatant lies. Luo Qing had actually claimed he was here to join the resistance. What a joke! If he really wanted to join, then why did he make 80 of their men dance for days on end? In a low whisper, Goro quickly summarized all the intelligence he had on Luo Qing to Kokomi. Visibly, Kokomi's expression shifted from a polite smile to a slight frown, her gaze on Luo Qing becoming more scrutinizing. A Fatui Harbinger, who had saved the traveler from the Raiden Shogun, now held the rank of General of Surveillance in the Shogunate and was offering to join forces with the resistance to sabotage the Shogunate. It was complicated, to say the least. Even Kokomi couldn't quite figure out what Luo Qing's motives were. Was he truly working with the resistance just to make prisoners dance? What kind of person does that? There's one more thing. After finishing his briefing, Goro shot another glance at Luo Qing before adding quietly. This guy might not be right in the head. Please, Lady Kokomi, don't let him lead you astray. I understand. Kokomi nodded, then turned to Luo Qing with a polite smile. Mr. Luo Qing, Goro has already told me about you. May I ask if your only reason for cooperating with the resistance is to make prisoners dance? Even as she said it, Kokomi had trouble keeping a straight face. She had already heard from the reports about how Goro and his men were forced to dance as a form of humiliation by the shogunate. Yet here stood the mastermind behind it, now claiming he wanted to do the same to the shogunate. Fatui Harbingers really are strange people. Of course. Why, Lady Kokomi, don't you believe me? Luo Qing responded casually, still as relaxed as ever. The resistance was outmatched in both equipment and manpower, especially with the recent arrival of shogunate reinforcements. They were all smart people here, and Luo Qing doubted Kokomi would refuse his offer. No, I believe you, Mr. Luo Qing. I just wanted to confirm. Kokomi shook her head slightly, then added softly. We can agree that any shogunate prisoners we capture will be left to you. But, Mr. Luo Qing, how exactly do you intend to assist the resistance? Are you truly willing to turn your back on the shogunate, just for such peculiar requests? Her voice remained gentle and polite, but there was a clear hint of skepticism. She still couldn't quite believe that someone would do all this just out of sheer boredom. Absolutely. Next time we face the shogunate, I'll be there to help. Luo Qing smiled, extending his right hand. So, here's to a successful partnership. He really just wanted an excuse to shake Kokomi's hand. Kokomi glanced at his outstretched hand, hesitating slightly. To be honest, she wasn't comfortable with physical contact from strangers, especially not like this. Does Lady Kokomi not trust me? After a brief pause, Kokomi gently extended her own hand. As their hands touched, Luo Qing felt the warmth of her skin against his. He held on for several seconds before finally letting go. It didn't matter what else happened, getting to hold Kokomi's hand made this encounter totally worth it. With Lady Kokomi's agreement to cooperate with Luo Qing, Goro had no choice but to allow him free rein in the resistance camp. He begrudgingly watched as Luo Qing roamed about, chatting with the very soldiers he had forced to dance. Kokomi, having other matters to attend to, didn't linger after her discussion with Luo Qing. She exchanged a few words with Lumen before leaving the camp. The next morning, the shogunate forces had finished their preparations and sounded the horn, launching an attack against the resistance. Qiu Sara led the charge, her expression calm, confident that the resistance was no match for them. As for Luo Qing, who had vanished somewhere to go fishing the day before, she didn't expect him to contribute much to the front lines. As long as he didn't interfere, that was enough for her. The shogunate army marched past the shipwreck at Nizuchi Beach, where they saw the resistance already lined up, ready to meet them. Both sides faced each other, and Qiu Sara and Goro stepped forward to the front lines. Humph, only you here? I was hoping to meet your tactician this time. Qiu Sara said coldly. We've already seen through your resistance's resources. With such a disparity in numbers, no strategy can change the outcome. Are you prepared to face your punishment? I believe in Lady Kokomi, and I believe in the warriors of the resistance. We will never give up. Humph, foolish bravado. Qiu Sara scoffed. And there's one more thing, you must have seen the latest wanted notices, correct? Hand over the blonde-haired traveler, and I might grant you a brief reprieve. The resistance will never betray its own. You can forget about it. Goro declared firmly. How touching. Qiu Sara sneered. Now, who will you send for the duel this time? Or will you face me yourself? I. Goro started, but before he could say more, Lumen stepped forward from the crowd, determination in her eyes. I'll do it. We meet again. This time, I won't let you escape. At Qiu Sara's command, several shogunate warriors stepped forward. Lumen unsheathed her sword, showing no hint of retreat. As expected, the battle was brief. Lumen, with her command over multiple elements, easily defeated the so-called elite warriors in a few swift moves. Seeing her soldiers fall, Qiu Sara knew she couldn't delay any longer. With a wave of her hand, the shogunate troops charged, shouting, "For the eternity of Narukami!" and clashed with the resistance. Amidst the chaos of battle, a shadowy figure flitted into the fray. Wherever it passed, shogunate soldiers fell one after another, unable to even cry out in alarm. Chapter 138, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 138. The battlefield was chaotic, with soldiers falling every moment. The shogunate forces and the resistance were locked in fierce combat, while Qiu Sara, engaged in a duel with Goro, kept a watchful eye on the overall battle. Despite the shogunate's superior numbers, each resistance fighter facing at least 3 shogunate soldiers, the tide of the battle was turning against them. Frowning, Qiu Sara tried to understand the sudden shift. Just then, a shadow flickered past her, swiftly taking down the shogunate soldiers around her, leaving them unable to rise. That presence. Qiu Sara's brows furrowed as she sensed the remnants of that fleeting figure's energy. It felt, just like Luo Qing. He's helping the resistance. That bastard. Qiu Sara cursed under her breath, then waved her hand, commanding the nearby soldiers. Everyone, retreat. With someone as powerful as Luo Qing on par with the shogun herself, there was no way the shogunate could win. For now, she had no choice but to withdraw and regroup, hoping to confront Luo Qing later. Upon hearing the order, the shogunate forces began to retreat. But even during their withdrawal, many of them were struck down by Luo Qing's shadowy assaults, becoming prisoners of the resistance. We won. Paimon, hiding behind the front lines, raised her tiny hands in a victorious cheer. Everyone, clear the battlefield and bring the prisoners back to the camp. Goro ordered, staring at the numerous unconscious shogunate soldiers with a mixture of emotions. Since the start of the war against the shogunate, this was the easiest victory he had ever experienced. Except for his duel with Qiu Sera, all the other resistance fighters barely had to lift a finger. Whenever they clashed with shogunate troops, Luo Qing's shadow would appear, and the enemy would fall without any resistance. Some of the resistance soldiers hadn't even broken a sweat, their muscles hardly warmed up before the battle was over. So this is what it's like to have Luo Qing fighting for our side? Goro's feelings were complicated. After the battlefield was cleared, he did a head count. Not a single resistance fighter had fallen, and they had captured over 100 shogunate soldiers. It was a historic victory. Looking around, he noticed that Luo Qing was nowhere to be seen. Shrugging, he directed the resistance to return to camp. Upon entering, he was surprised to see Luo Qing already there, rubbing his hands together with a look of eager excitement. How many did you capture? Goro was speechless, baffled by Luo Qing's obsession. Despite possessing overwhelming power, he seemed fixated on such peculiar matters. We captured 123 soldiers. All of them only have minor injuries and should recover by tomorrow. Good, matches my count. Luo Qing nodded, pulling out the large phonograph from his inventory and handing it to Goro. Since the battle is over, I'm heading back. I'll leave this with you. You can start teaching them how to dance tonight. You're going back? Goro was confused. You just helped us defeat the shogunate, and you're planning to return? Doesn't Qiu Sera have a problem with this? If I don't go back, I'm afraid little Sera might throw a tantrum. Luo Qing chuckled, adding, all right, I'll be back tomorrow. Don't miss me too much. +1 annoyance value from Goro. Without waiting for Goro's response, Luo Qing vanished from the camp. Shortly after, back at the shogunate's camp, Qiu Sera scowled at the damage report in her hands. Before the battle, she had only hoped that Luo Qing wouldn't sabotage her plans. Yet, to her frustration, he had outright assisted the enemy, turning what should have been a guaranteed victory into a humiliating defeat. She couldn't comprehend it. Luo Qing wasn't even from Inajima, he was just another Fatui. Why did the shogun tolerate him so much, granting his every request? There were even times when she sought an audience with the shogun, only to overhear strange noises coming from inside, suggesting Luo Qing's presence. Why does he have such sway over the shogun? Feeling both irritation and curiosity, Qiu Sera decided to confront Luo Qing directly. Leaving the camp, she headed north toward the coast, following the directions Luo Qing had given about his fishing spot. After walking for some time, she finally spotted a familiar Fatui-style tent set up on the beach. Luo Qing and Teresa were sitting by a campfire, leisurely grilling fish with relaxed smiles. Seeing Sera's approach, Luo Qing didn't panic. He simply waved a grilled fish at her. Hey there, Lady Qiu Sera. How was the battle today? Care for some grilled fish to unwind? Sera's expression darkened as she stood before them, her voice icy. Why did you help the resistance today? Feigning innocence, Luo Qing responded, the resistance? What resistance? Lady Qiu, are you accusing me without proof? Don't play dumb. Sera's temper flared. Who else could have moved that quickly? I could tell it was you just by the scent in the air. Scent? What scent? Luo Qing tilted his head innocently. Wait, did you secretly take a whiff of me? +1 annoyance value from Qiu Sera. If not for the fact that she couldn't beat him, Sera would have struck him down with a bolt of lightning on the spot. In any case, you owe me an explanation. If you don't, I'll have no choice but to consider it an act of rebellion by General Luo Qing and report you to the shogun. Report me. Luo Qing's face was the picture of feigned shock. Lady Qiu, you don't have any evidence. Do you think the shogun will believe you over me? Sera hesitated. Knowing the shogun's attitude toward Luo Qing, even with evidence, she doubted the shogun would actually punish him. Damn it, what on earth did this man do to enchant the shogun like this? So, it's best if we just get along, don't you think? Luo Qing grinned, offering Sarah a freshly grilled fish. Here, try my grilled fish. It's big, firm, and delicious. Sarah stood still, her face darkened, reluctant to accept Luo Qing's offering. What's this? Lady Qiuzhao, not giving me any face. Luo Qing teased. Humph. Sarah huffed, shooting a glance at Teresa who was quietly tending the grill and finally took the grilled fish from Luo Qing's hand, seating herself by the campfire. But just as she sat down, a familiar, maddening tune drifted over from the resistance camp. Hearing that music, Sarah's barely relaxed expression tightened once more. She shot Luo Qing a cold glare. You still claim that wasn't you earlier. Chapter 139, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 139. What does it have to do with me? Luo Qing glanced at his system as his frustration value kept skyrocketing. Calmly taking a bite of his grilled fish, he played it cool. Maybe the resistance felt humiliated after what I put them through, so they decided to use my own trick against me. Humph. I don't believe anyone else could be as childish and bored as you. Qiuzhao Sarah huffed, looking disdainfully at the grilled fish in her hand, clearly tempted to slap it right across Luo Qing's face. But her upbringing held her back. Childish? How can you say that? This dance is so much fun, isn't that right, Teresa? Luo Qing turned to Teresa, his gaze gentle. +1 frustration value from Teresa. Why yes, Lord Luo Qing, it's definitely fun. Teresa forced a smile, thinking to herself, who else has a superior who makes their subordinates dance every day? See? There you go. Luo Qing grinned. I think you're just too tense, Qiuzhao Sarah. How about you try dancing? Relax a bit. Who would want to learn something like that? Qiuzhao Sarah could feel her blood pressure rising just from talking to Luo Qing. Finishing the grilled fish as quickly as possible, she muttered a half-hearted thanks before hastily returning to the shogunate camp. Even though Luo Qing refused to admit it, she had already mentally classified him as being on the side of the resistance. With Luo Qing on their side, her previous strategies against the resistance and the traveler were no longer viable. His strength, comparable to a god's, was something no ordinary soldiers could contend with. Her top priority now was to report back to the shogun and let her deal with Luo Qing. On the other side, after Qiuzhao Sarah left, Luo Qing smirked and with a thought, pulled out a toilet from his inventory and set it down on the beach. This wasn't just any toilet, its other end was fixed in the plain of Euthymia, meaning no matter how far he was from Inajima city, he could always use it to teleport back. Since things at the front were quiet for now and he had nothing better to do in the evening, Luo Qing figured it was time to pay the shogun a visit for some fun. Sitting on the toilet, Luo Qing's figure disappeared in an instant, leaving Teresa staring at the object, deep in thought. Why is my lord's way of traveling always so abstract? She pondered. Getting flushed away by a toilet, really? In the plain of Euthymia, the shogun, known as Ei when in her inner sanctuary, opened her eyes as she sensed movement. She gazed toward the toilet and watched as Luo Qing popped out of it. Breathing in deeply, she calmly remarked, "You still remember how to come back?" Luo Qing was confused. What's wrong with her? Why does she look like a scorned wife? What did I do? Seeing Luo Qing's puzzled expression, Ei continued, "You haven't brought me any light novels or sweets in over a month." Luo Qing was speechless. Are you seriously still that much of a shut-in? Have you not left this place even once? You want more? Ei frowned slightly. Don't joke like that. I meant the novels and sweets. What did you think I was talking about? Luo Qing chuckled. Why don't you just get them yourself? Why make me do it every time? Ei fell silent. She suspected Luo Qing was making suggestive remarks, but she had no proof. Have you read them all? Luo Qing walked over to the bookshelf behind her, which was neatly filled with light novels. He couldn't help but sigh. If that pink-haired fox knew about your current state, she'd probably be rolling on the floor laughing. You told her? Ei's expression shifted. Not yet, Luo Qing chuckled. But she probably already suspects. One of these days, she might show up in here too. If you dare bring her in here, you'll be dead. Ei's voice dropped dangerously low. Having known that pink fox for so many years, she could already imagine how much teasing she'd be in for if Luo Qing ever did that. How could I? This is our special little world. Luo Qing teased, leaning close to her face. Come on, give me a kiss and I'll go buy you some more novels. Get out. Ei waved her hand, forcefully ejecting Luo Qing from the plane of euthymia. How dare he demand a kiss? He was getting bolder. Thrown out of the plane of euthymia, Luo Qing found himself back in the Tenshikaku, landing right in front of the Raiden Shogun. You're back again. The Raiden Shogun raised her head, surprised. Because I missed you too. Without waiting for her response, Luo Qing grabbed her face and kissed her. It wasn't until a long moment later that they finally separated. Even Ei in the plane of euthymia, who could feel everything happening outside, was feeling a bit uncomfortable. Ha, was that the only reason you came back? The Shogun's face was flushed. It seemed like Luo Qing's technique had improved again, her mechanical body could hardly handle it. Of course. Alright, I'll go get some things for Ei now. I'll be back soon to play with you again, Shogun. Luo Qing ruffled her hair before leaping off the balcony. As he disappeared, the Shogun's face momentarily showed a flicker of displeasure. It finally dawned on Luo Qing why Ei wouldn't ask the Shogun to get her light novels and sweets. These two are jealous of each other. Walking through the bustling Hanamizaka streets, Luo Qing thought about whether he should bring some snacks back for Teresa when he suddenly heard something fall behind him. Turning around, he saw Kamisato Ayaka standing there, staring at him in shock, her dropped bubble tea spilling across the ground. Beside her, Kamisato Ayaka wore an equally surprised expression. Didn't Luo Qing say he went back to Snezhnia? Why is he here again? Ayaka had come to Inajima City to comfort his sister, who had been heartbroken after Luo Qing's supposed departure. Hey, long time no see. Luo Qing blinked, then smiled softly. He hadn't expected to run into the Kamisato siblings here. Lord Luo Qing, weren't you supposed to be back in Snezhnia? Ayaka stammered, clearly unprepared to meet him under these circumstances. Luo Qing, it's been a while, Ayaka greeted politely, though his mind was racing. The best Luo Qing is a Luo Qing who isn't in Inajima. He had hoped that with Luo Qing gone, his sister's dilemma between love and family obligations would resolve itself. But now that Luo Qing had come back, Ayaka found himself at a crossroads. Do I really have no choice but to let Luo Qing take my sister after all? Chapter 140, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 140 DDD. Hey? I was just away on a business trip. Where did you get the idea I went back to Snezhnia? Luo Qing was genuinely puzzled. He'd never told anyone about his whereabouts, so who was spreading false rumors? Well. Kamisato Ayaka hesitantly raised her small hand. Luo Qing. When I went to your residence that day, a lady in your room told me. I see. Luo Qing nodded slightly. As expected, he knew what had happened. He continued, that woman's out of her mind. You don't have to pay attention to her, Miss Kamisato. Ah. Ayaka was stunned. She had planned to subtly pry into what kind of relationship that elegant and proud woman had with Luo Qing and why they lived together. But now, it seemed like their relationship wasn't great. That was a relief. An awkward silence fell between them. Luo Qing still needed to head to Ye Publishing House to buy some light novels for Ei. If he didn't hurry, the shop would close. Seeing that the Kamisato siblings didn't seem to have much else to say, he politely offered, well, if there's nothing else, I have some errands to run. Let's catch up another time. With a casual wave, Luo Qing brushed past Ayaka's shoulder and headed toward the bookstore. Ayaka's expression changed suddenly. She had been thinking of ways to invite Luo Qing over to play the hot pot game with her brother's permission. Now that he was leaving, she panicked. She glanced nervously up at her older brother, Kamisato Ayaka, then kept stealing glances at Luo Qing, afraid he would disappear if she looked away even for a moment. It was clear she was desperate. Ayaka looked down at his sister's anxious face and sighed helplessly. He knew she was silently seeking his permission to chase after Luo Qing. But the problem was, Ayaka was dangerously close to throwing herself at him. If he gave his blessing now, setting aside the family's reputation, what if Luo Qing got any ideas? His sister might not return home tonight. Ayaka's mind was in turmoil. After a long pause, just as he was about to decide, Ayaka suddenly bowed to him and said, I'm sorry, brother. Let me be selfish this once. Without waiting for Ayaka's response, she lifted her kimono and dashed off in the direction Luo Qing had gone, her wooden sandals clicking rapidly against the ground. Sigh. Father never prepared me for this kind of situation. Ayato sighed again, shaking his head as he turned back toward Komor tea house. All he could do now was hope his sister wouldn't spend the night away. Meanwhile, at Ye Publishing House, Luo Qing had left the siblings behind and was about to dive into the women's fiction section for a shopping spree when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Luo. Ah. Hearing the sound, Luo Qing turned around just in time to catch Ayaka as she stumbled right into his arms. Luo Qing gently held Ayaka, looking down at her as she looked up at him, their gazes meeting. The atmosphere suddenly felt awkward. Sorry, Luo Qing. I didn't see the threshold there. Ayaka's face turned red as she hurriedly pulled away, lowering her head to glare at the step that had tripped her. In her rush to catch up to Luo Qing, she hadn't noticed the store's threshold. And wearing wooden sandals today, which made balancing trickier, she had stumbled right into his arms. Seriously, who places a threshold at a bookstore's entrance? She thought, though a tiny part of her didn't seem to mind the accident. Did you need something, Miss Kamisato? Luo Qing looked over Ayaka's shoulder, noticing her brother wasn't around. Was she here alone? Well. Ayaka fidgeted, her hands clasped behind her back as her fingers nervously intertwined. Her face flushed a deeper shade of pink. Master, are you buying light novels for that lady? No, it's for another friend, Luo Qing replied, shaking his head. And, Miss Kamisato, you don't have to call me master anymore. Didn't we end that relationship a while ago? Okay. Ayaka's expression dimmed slightly. She had hoped that keeping the term master would maintain a special bond between them. But now, Luo Qing wanted to sever even that connection. Then, what should I call you, Luo Qing? Ayaka asked softly. Luo Qing is fine. He smiled gently, turning his attention to the nearby bookshelf. As he began picking out light novels and tossing them into a basket, he asked casually, so why did you follow me, Miss Kamisato? Did you have something you wanted to say? Feigning ignorance and playing it cool, he was an expert. After all, he'd played the part of the devoted admirer with Ayaka for so long, only for her to shut him out twice. House or no house, there's no winning Kamisato Ayaka's heart, he thought. Ayaka's eyes darted to the books in the basket. After a moment's hesitation, she said softly, I read a lot of light novels too, Luo Qing. Would you like me to help you pick some? Luo Qing felt a bit awkward. He hadn't planned to carefully select anything, he was just going to grab whatever was new and toss it to EI. Whether the books were good or worth continuing was for EI to decide, he was just the delivery boy. But Ayaka's hopeful gaze made him hesitate. She looked like she'd cry if he said no. All right then, Miss Kamisato. I'd appreciate the help. He moved aside slightly to give her space. Yes. Ayaka's face lit up with a joyful smile. She nodded eagerly, quickly stepping closer to the shelf. As she peeked into the basket, she asked again. Are all these for that friend? Pretty much. But the styles of these light novels are all over the place. Luo Qing, does your friend really like reading all kinds? She seems to like the kind that makes her cry. Then some of these won't fit. Without waiting for his permission, Ayaka began removing some of the books from the basket, murmuring to herself. These are all light and comedic, your friend probably wouldn't enjoy them. Then she added a few other books to the basket, saying. These, on the other hand, should be more to her taste. Luo Qing watched Ayaka's methodical sorting with a strange feeling welling up inside him. His relationship with EI and the Raiden Shogun had progressed to the point where they were practically halfway to being lovers. Now, here was Kamisato Ayaka, eager to mend their broken bond, carefully choosing light novels for EI. It struck him then, oh no, Ayaka had become a complete fangirl.
Thanks for listening.